Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to the Enterprise Community Partners Faith-Based Development Initiative Annual Summit for 2025. We're excited to have you tuning in today to hear insightful presentations and dialogue on the theme Getting It Done, Projects, Policy, and Perspectives from the Field. I'm David Bowers with Enterprise Community Partners, and we'll look forward to being your host, if you would, for the day. Throughout this conversation today, we will explore the work that is taking place across the United States of America to transform the land that is under the stewardship of houses of worship, transforming it into housing that serves low and moderate income households, as well as community facilities and community amenities that are provided in the developments that houses of worship are doing. Today, we will hear from a range of practitioners from the faith community and the housing affordability and community development ecosystem. All of these are people who are helping to indeed get it done. Please note that the bios for all of today's speakers are online on the event page for today's event, and we encourage you to take a look and learn more about all of our wonderful speakers who are with us here today. Now, to ground our faith-based development initiative event in prayer, we are honored to be joined today by Reverend Ashley Goff. Reverend Goff is the pastor of the Arlington Presbyterian Church in Arlington, Virginia. The church was a critical player in the collaboration with the developer that is now called True Ground to develop 173 units of affordable housing on the site of the previous church building. It is an inspiring story of a congregation's journey that led to new housing, workforce development, and worship space in a community. And we encourage you to check out the website for the church to learn more. Reverend Goff, thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you being with us to bring us our invocation. The virtual floor is yours.
Let us gather ourselves and our spirits. Holy One, we gather today from many communities, many callings, and many corners of the country. And yet we come with a shared hope that every neighbor has a safe, affordable place to live, to rest, to grow, and belong. A hope that our neighborhoods become places of welcome, where housing for all is not feared, it's embraced as a sign of our shared thriving. We give thanks for the movement that brings us together, for congregations opening their imaginations, for developers and policy shapers doing the slow, faithful work of building what our communities need, for advocates who keep widening the circle, and for the spirit that nudges us again and again towards courage. We name the realities before us. Too many are without homes. Too many are priced out of the neighborhoods where they work. Too many dreams are stalled by systems designed to keep people out. And in this time of deep affordability crisis, where federal dysfunction suffocates solutions and political will feels thin, we ask, O God, strengthen our collective resolve. Let what happens in spaces like this one create the momentum our leaders cannot ignore. Let our faith-rooted determination help shift what seems immovable. So move among us today. Stir our hearts to insist on housing that honors the dignity of every neighbor. Strengthen our will to turn underused land into places of welcome and possibility. Clear away the fear that whispers, that shouts, not here. And amplify the hope that says yes in God's backyard, yes in our backyards, yes because our faith demands we love our neighbor, not in theory, but in practice. Let this day be filled with real stories and real tools and real partnership and the collective determination to keep building homes and community assets that reflect the justice and compassion at the center of our faith traditions. Bless our conversations, our collaborations, and the movement we're shaping together. May what begins here ripple outward into communities that are more whole, more welcoming, and a home for all. Amen. Back to you, David.
Amen indeed. Thank you so much, Pastor Goff. We are grateful for your prayer to center us and ground us for this day. Friends, the Enterprise Faith-Based Development Initiative, or FBDI for short, is in its 19th year. A key goal of this effort is to expand the supply of housing and community facilities that serve low and moderate income households. Our approach is to do this by providing the intellectual and financial capital, or dollars and cents with an S, as we like to say, that houses of worship need to make informed go, no-go decisions and equip them with the tools they need to understand how to put together a strong team. Over our 19 years of doing FBDI across the country, we are learning lessons and applying it to expand what is now our multi-year cohort model that provides a comprehensive range of training, technical, and financial support. We are working with a range of stakeholders from the faith community, public, and private sector to help grow this movement. And growing this movement is important when we think of the nation's housing affordability needs. Data like over 700,000 homeless in our nation, the reality that 20% of all renter households pay more than half of every dollar they make for their housing. There is indeed a housing affordability challenge, some say crisis, in our country. And we think of the fact that an article in 2025 on Forbes noted that faith-based organizations own 2.6 million acres of land that could potentially support 800,000 new housing units. After listening to the presentations and the dialogue today, we hope that you will leave informed and inspired to think of what your organization, whatever it may be, government, private sector, faith, philanthropic, whatever it may be, that think about what your organization can do to support this expanding national movement that Enterprise and a number of other organizations around the country are in today. Now, a key to expanding this movement is the investment of partners that believe in the mission and are willing to support folks who are doing the work. So to that end, I am happy to introduce Kimberlyn Harris. She is the head of Small Business Growth Philanthropy for the Wells Fargo Foundation. Wells Fargo is our sustaining sponsor for today's event. And we want to be clear that the Wells Fargo Foundation has been a critical supporter of Enterprise's faith-based development initiative work in ways that are instrumental in allowing us to expand our work in markets across the country. The support from the Wells Fargo Foundation has allowed us to support FBDI cohorts in 9 cities across the country and has been catalytic in attracting additional private as well as public support. A marker has been laid that is helping us to indeed grow the movement. Kimberlyn, thank you for being with us today. The virtual floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you, David. It's such a pleasure to be here with all of you. Good afternoon, good morning, based on where you're located. Again, I want to extend my sincere gratitude to you, David, and to the entire team at Enterprise Community Partners for inviting me to join you all today. I also want to thank each of you on the line for being here. Your commitment to strengthening communities is evident. Even in this virtual setting, it is quite encouraging and inspiring to have all of us gathered here. For those that I have not yet had the pleasure of meeting, as David mentioned, I am Kimberlyn Harris. I'm head of Small Business Growth Philanthropy, and interim head of Housing Access and Affordability Philanthropy at Wells Fargo. In these roles, I lead strategies designed to bring forth the breadth of our company's resources, our expertise to help address community needs, to spark transformation and innovation in how we support communities, and to advance economic opportunity. At Wells Fargo, we want to help communities and people thrive. That is key and core to our mission. We believe that quality, affordable housing is the cornerstone of stability and prosperity. It creates the foundation for building wealth and opportunity. And that's why we want to continue to evolve and elevate our support for housing access and affordability. We've donated over $745 million since 2019 to support these efforts. Our efforts, again, focus on keeping people housed. It is focused on increasing affordable housing supply, including its impact on housing workforce, and also really focusing in on how we open doors to home ownership. We all on the phone today, in this virtual convening, we all know that the cost and other barriers continue to challenge access to the most basic need of home ownership. Now more than ever, we stand at a pivotal moment, one that calls for bold action to shift how we think about ensuring people have access to affordable and safe housing. We need a holistic approach that integrates financial opportunity and small business growth that will create lasting, positive, sustainable change. Together, we can advocate for vibrant communities and ensure that every individual can succeed. What we know for sure is that we cannot do this work without our faith leaders and our houses of worship. These institutions are often the heart of the community and know firsthand where support is most needed. It is our responsibility, as you mentioned, David, our private and public responsibility collectively to equip our faith-based leaders and houses of worship with tools and resources to serve more efficiently and effectively. That is why, for many, many reasons, we are so just grateful, David, to your partnership and partnership with Enterprise Community Partners. And that partnership is so very critical. We announced, Enterprise Community Partners announced an $8.5 million effort in grants from the Wells Fargo Foundation to help houses of worship across the U.S. convert underutilized land into affordable homes and community facilities. The funding from Wells Fargo supports the nationwide expansion of the Enterprise's faith-based development initiative, which partners with houses of worship to create affordable homes. In addition, $1 million in faith-based funding was deployed through the TD Jakes Foundation to Enterprise during 2023 and 2024, really enabling the expansion into the Texas markets of Dallas, Houston, and San Antonio. So by working together, we can continue to build resilience. We can continue to open doors to opportunities that strengthen families and communities. And at the heart of it all, this is what truly matters: our communities and the people who live and work in them. That's what really matters. So we will continue to join forces. Together, we can improve lives and create a future where everyone has the chance to thrive. Thank you, David.
Kimberlyn, thank you so much. We are really grateful for you taking the time to be with us today. And as we said, really, really grateful for the support from Wells Fargo and the Wells Fargo Foundation. You all have continued to make investments, as you said, that have allowed us to expand this movement in a way that has really been truly catalytic and impactful. So thanks again for being here and for the support from the Wells Fargo Foundation. I'm honored next to be able to introduce our fearless leader. Our next speaker is Sean Donovan here at Enterprise. Sean is the president and CEO at Enterprise. As many of you all know, Sean's background: he's the former director of the Office of Management and Budget, OMB. He's a former secretary of the Department of Housing and Urban Development, HUD. Also in his career was the director of the Department of Housing in New York City. Sean has a long and distinguished career of service in the housing affordability and community development space over many years. And Sean is now leading Enterprise to our next frontiers of impacting housing affordability and trying to help this country solve for its housing affordability challenge. Now, Sean couldn't be with us today, but by the magic of video, we are pleased that Sean Donovan will bring us remarks today in this recorded remark.
Hello, and welcome to Enterprise's annual Faith-Based Development Initiative Summit. At Enterprise, we see the same urgency you see in your pews, in your neighborhoods, and among the families you serve. This country is facing a shortage of over 7 million homes. We need every partner at the table to address the affordability crisis. And working with the faith-based organizations who are mission-oriented, rooted in their communities, and own land in every part of this country is, as our remarkable David Bowers puts it, radical common sense. That's why, since 2006, Enterprise has operated FBDI, giving congregations the training, technical support, and catalytic capital to make informed go, no-go decisions and move good ideas into real development. Today, we're operating multi-year FBDI cohorts in 13 places in 8 states across the country, supporting more than 150 houses of worship who are projected to produce more than 9,000 affordable homes. Just this year, we expanded for the first time into Cuyahoga County, Ohio, Charlotte, North Carolina, and Chattanooga, Tennessee. And new cities and counties continue to reach out to partner with us to equip their houses of worship in their communities. In other words, we're proving that faith-owned land can fuel impactful growth across the country. Red state, blue state, purple state, urban, suburban, and rural communities alike. The theme of this year's summit, Getting It Done, couldn't be more timely. This year's elections made it crystal clear Americans are crying out for solutions to a crushing affordability crisis. The time for half measures is over. We need intentional projects, policy, and perspectives that support faith-based development and accelerate this work, not slow it down. I want to extend special thanks to our sustaining partner, Wells Fargo, for their continued commitment and partnership and for being with us today. Finally, next year marks a major milestone, the 20th anniversary of Enterprise's Faith-Based Development Initiative. We'll be celebrating not just a program, but a national movement of congregations and public and private sector partners that have turned mission and land into real housing, opportunity, and community transformation. Thank you to our panelists today for lending their expertise and for all of you that are helping to advance this movement on the ground. We look forward to building the next chapter with you. With that, thank you for being here today. David, back to you.
Many thanks to Sean for his remarks. We appreciate you, Sean, for your leadership and support of the movement and the effort. Now, Sean made note of this word that you'll hear throughout the day, I believe, which is the movement. And key to the movement's growth will be support from government at all levels, federal, state, and local. I often remind people who may be dubious that we aspire to be a government of the people, by the people, and for the people. And at its best, government is to serve the people and help meet the needs of the people. And hey, to get a development done, you've got to engage with government at some level, whether you want to or not. Just ask Nehemiah about the permits and the appropriation he received from the king for his wall rebuilding efforts. All right, now that's the end of my mini sermon for all my good church folk out there. Now, to give us an overview of what is happening at the federal level, we are joined by my colleague, Emily Noce-Lirer. Emily is a director with our national policy team. Emily, we appreciate you being with us today to bring us some insights about what is taking place at the federal level. The virtual floor is yours, my friend.
David, thanks so much for the introduction and for inviting me to speak today. I will talk a little bit about a bill called Yes in God's Backyard that's been introduced in Congress, as well as to talk a little bit more about the housing situation at the federal level overall right now. So I'll talk a little bit about the Yes in God's Backyard Act, affectionately called the YIGBY Act by its introducers and supporters. So this was introduced in this Congress by Senator Mark Warner, a Democrat from Virginia. As you all on the call may know, this had previously been championed by Senator Sherrod Brown of Ohio. So anyone who's on the call from Cuyahoga County organizations, which is where I grew up, would be familiar with his strong long-term passion for this while he was in Congress as well. So what the bill would do is create 2 new programs to help facilitate faith-based development, as well as development on the campuses of higher education institutions, both the campuses, but also on any kind of excess property that they might own that they'd like to do housing development on. And it would create a technical assistance program, which would basically provide technical assistance to local governments to remove permitting barriers to this kind of housing, to ease the way for this kind of development. It would create a grant program that would run for 5 years under this bill. And it also would create a grant program called Challenge Grants to do money for state and local governments or planning agencies that could provide a range of funding, either for updating their own permitting or all the way to providing money for the construction or land acquisition for these housing projects. So this would be a bill that would do quite a bit of good to improve the ability of churches and other faith organizations, as well as higher education institutions, to do this kind of housing development. And there are a few steps that still need to be done to kind of get this bill across the finish line. I'm sure everyone is familiar with the many hurdles that a bill has to go through to pass in Congress, especially at the moment. Right now, it's only been introduced on the Senate side of Congress. Representative Nanette Barragan of California does plan to introduce the bill in the House soon. Another key part of getting this bill moved forward would be getting additional sponsors on the bill. Currently, it's only supported by Democratic members of Congress, and so it will need to be bipartisan in the current Congress to pass. That's kind of a requirement for things to be able to move right now. So if you all are out there thinking about what you can do to help move this legislation or any other housing piece of legislation forward, it's really useful to be able to talk to your member of Congress to work on, improving those relationships. If you don't have a good relationship already, if you do have a good relationship, kind of keeping those really strong and reminding your member of Congress just how important it is for their support on legislation like this. This can be especially useful if your senator or member of Congress on the House of Representatives is on what's called the Committee of Jurisdiction for these issues. That means that they have kind of the first bite at the apple to make changes to this bill and to help secure its passage. In the Senate, that's the Banking Committee. In the House, it's a committee called the Financial Services Committee. So you can always look up your member of Congress and see if they're on on those committees, and then their opinion on the bill is especially important. But as important as this bill is, it's also coming in the context of a much larger congressional focus on housing at the moment. Some of the other speakers have talked about the really crushing affordability crisis that is facing housing people are facing around the country. And there have been other bills that have recently been passed in the Senate to make permitting easier, not just for faith-based development or higher education institutions like the YIGBY Act, but to make this permitting easier across the board. So there are bills that would provide, best practices frameworks for municipalities updating their land use regulations, and that would be for all housing, and bills that would expand the definition of manufactured housing to include modular homes, which could potentially bring down construction costs. There has really been in this Congress, in 2025, and this Congress will continue into 2026, a huge focus on these areas. And we have seen a number of these bills pass the Senate unanimously, which has been really exciting. Unfortunately, the YIGBY Act has not been, through the Senate yet, hasn't passed the Senate yet. But like I said, there are a number of really important bills that have recently passed the Senate and are being negotiated on the House side right now. And I think as we speak, the whole federal policy team at Enterprise and kind of our housing experts around housing expert partners around the country are following that very intensely to see what gets negotiated and which bills might have the opportunity to pass the whole Congress and go to the president's desk for a signature. I'll also really briefly mention another congressional process that has a large impact on housing, which is the annual appropriations process. This is the process of getting money to programs that have been created. So, the YIGBY Act, if it did pass, which we hope it does, would then need to have money appropriated to it by Congress to get that money out the door and into the projects that you all are working on. I'm sure you all remember that there was a very disruptive government shutdown earlier this year. There was, of course, a lot of concern about different housing programs that are funded by the federal government, as well as a number of other programs that serve people in need. And while that government shutdown has been resolved, that was done partially by passing some legislation to fund some departments of the government for the full year. And some departments now will be funded through the end of January. As you all probably know, a lot of housing programs that provide funding for housing construction and for rental assistance and for permitting assistance come through the Department of Housing and Urban Development through HUD. And the bill that funds HUD has not been passed by Congress yet for this year. So after when January 30th runs around, Congress really will be negotiating quite hard again on those bills. And so, we at Enterprise really advocate strongly for additional appropriations as much as we can. And in some circumstances, we advocate very strongly for a lack of cuts. So depending on the political environment that we're working in year to year, sometimes a lack of a cut can be a huge victory for us. And so we'll be following this process very closely. And I'm happy to, answer some questions through the Q&A box. I see people typing some in. Otherwise, I will pass it back to David. Thanks so much.
Great. Thank you so much, Emily. We are very grateful for you taking the time to be with us, to share that information and that update on what's happening at the federal level. And really want to encourage folks to think about what Emily shared about how, if this is of interest to you, think about various ways, whether individually, organizationally, you may have a point of influence with folks in the Congress that you may be able to talk to about this and other issues related to supporting faith-based development and housing affordability in general. So take that seriously. And as we often say, also, you don't want the first time that folks hear from you is when you quote unquote need something, which is a good transition to our next panel, where we will share some updates on what is taking place on the state and local policy front. It's encouraging to see that there has been an expansion in the number of states and local jurisdictions taking a range of actions to support faith-based development. I'm really happy to introduce today our moderator for the panel, Enterprise's own Flora Arabu, Senior Director with the policy team. Joining Flora on the panel are Enterprise staff Patrick Boyle, who's a Senior Director in the Enterprise's New York office, Dr. Christy Cade, Vice President and Market Leader for Enterprise's Southeast office, Kinsey Hasted, Director, State and Local Policy with Enterprise Rocky Mountain Office, Alex Miles, who's an Associate Director for State and Local Policy with Enterprise's Southeast Office, and Hazel Remish, who's a Director of State and Local Policy with Enterprise's Ohio Office. Thank you all much for being with us. Flora, I turn it over to you.
All right. Thanks so much, David. So I'm Flora Arabu. I'm the National Senior Director for State and Local Policy at Enterprise. Just a little bit about state and local policy. Many of you know that Enterprise has a very deep programmatic and capital presence around 11 regions. But in those markets, we have deployed a network of policy directors who are locally based and directly advocate for the markets they serve. So in state houses and city halls across the country, our state and local policy team engages elected officials, guides government leaders, and works with partners to address communities' unique needs. We work in some of the highest cost cities in the country who are facing escalating affordability and displacement concerns. And we also work in some of the most distressed communities that are badly in need of investment and revitalization. So advocacy is critical in achieving some of the legislative and regulatory changes that we need to remove some of the barriers to success. And many faith-based organizations do face barriers to development. Our work is a lot more than just passing bills or updating regulations. Government and elected officials serve as conveners. They create incentives. They can push for affordability requirements or other requirements that support their communities. Today, we're going to take a deep look at 6 jurisdictions and how they leveraged policy advocacy at the state and local levels to support faith-based development. Our presenters will discuss what they did and how they did it. So we're going to start with Dr. Christy Cade, our Vice President and Market Leader of Enterprise's Southeast Market. Christy, I will turn it over to you.
Good afternoon, everyone, and it's great to see you all joining us for this summit. We're excited to share some information on how the local governments are actually engaging. And in the Southeast market, we're seeing more local governments really get involved in advancing programs, policy, and funding to collaborate with faith leaders and markets to activate real estate that they own, to address affordable housing and community facilities needs in the communities that they serve. Today, I'm going to talk about 2 of those communities in the Southeast market. The first one is Chattanooga. In Chattanooga, in 2022, the mayor of Chattanooga, Mayor Kelly, really selected a equitable recovery commission to develop a framework for one Chattanooga relief and recovery plan. This relief and recovery plan is in response to some of the things that came about because of the pandemic and revealed some needs, some greater needs that the community had. This commission was comprised of local leaders, faith-based leaders, and others who were emphasizing a plan for equitable development and community partnerships. The plan provided over $30 million of investments in innovative community-based initiatives The city created some new policies and programming to tackle issues toward the lack of accessibility and opportunity for housing, mental health, quality education. This has really catalyzed a couple of things that are happening in Chattanooga. The city actually invested in a couple of faith-based organizations to begin looking at the land that they own and what development could come about. In 2025, Chattanooga upped their investment and really set forth policy to say we really want to take the faith-based initiative forward. They contacted Enterprise. We are now launched in Chattanooga a faith-based development multi-year initiative. And what's exciting about this is that this Equitable Recovery Commission, the One Chattanooga Relief and Recovery Plan, has really catalyzed not just the city, who is investing $500,000 in a multi-year program, but also private foundations, the Community Foundation of Greater Chattanooga, and other donors to be a part of the faith-based development initiative. This will target looking at land that is owned by faith-based development organizations, looking at ways to utilize the existing policies, modify policies, look at funding that is available, including the new Invest Chattanooga $20 million equity fund that has been established that could provide equity and capital for faith-based development throughout Chattanooga. So the policies are in place. They've taken the initiative, and it's an equitable approach, collaborating with the faith-based leaders, looking at their land, and also bringing the resources and other partners and community to see faith-based development advance throughout Chattanooga, particularly in some of the communities that need reinvestment. Next slide, please. Let's look at Charlotte. Well, Charlotte, too, has been guided by a housing framework, the Housing Charlotte framework that was in partnership with nonprofits, housing developers, and other community partners. What is the framework across all the communities in Charlotte? How can we address the work that's needed in North Carolina, particularly as it relates to creating a robust toolbox of policies and programs for affordable housing issues, ranging from homelessness to homeownership? The framework is their response to a long history of racial segregation and its effect on residents throughout the community. So they have decided that they wanted to address the 24,000 unit deficit that was there in the city and really focus on households below 50% AMI, as well as other affordable housing issues throughout the city. So in January of 2024, the city of Charlotte not only had a framework, but they initiated something they called Faith in Housing in Charlotte. So they really stepped forward and said, we're going to bring forth faith leaders and others to talk about how faith leaders, the land they own, and other partners within the communities they serve, the neighborhoods they serve, could come together and really create opportunities right in the communities that they were in. So they offered a series of sessions to engage the houses of worship. Well, in 2025, Charlotte took it up a level, and they took their efforts to create a policy and actually went forward to pass a $100 million bond and partnered with Enterprise so that we can provide the training and technical assistance to support 12 houses of worship who desire to utilize their land and provide affordable housing. The city set aside funding and now has actually enacted a pilot where they're looking at their zoning policies for these houses of worship and how they can take zoning and advance affordable housing, really help the churches get over the barriers to affordable housing, and one of which is getting through the rezoning process for the land, and really activate the land to create affordable housing throughout. The City of Charlotte's program is on multiple neighborhoods throughout the city, with different congregations and faiths coming together to create affordable housing opportunities. The city has also set aside an allocation of funding for pre-development costs for these houses of worship, and has also identified a group of professionals that are going to provide real estate expertise to support them in their work. In both of these cities, what has really initiated the efforts locally is for the city leadership, both Mayor Kelly and also the Mayor of Charlotte, to come together, as well as council members, faith-based leaders, and other community leaders to say, what can we do? And then to activate policies, funding, and programs to support looking and working with churches, houses of worship across their cities who already own land to create opportunities where they are. And so we look forward to what will manifest out of both of these cities and the local support that is coming for those houses of worship. Thank you so much. And I'll pass it on to Hazel.
Thank you so much, and thanks everyone for joining us today. Like many jurisdictions across the country, Ohio is facing an affordable housing shortage across the state. This is especially complicated by the fact that we have a relatively aging housing stock and a peak in our older population that's expected to really be at its peak by 2030. And so some of the factors that are weighing in to the lack of affordability and just like a general shortage altogether had led to the Senate to issue a committee that was called the Senate Select Committee on Housing about the last General Assembly, so about 2 years ago. That committee went on a tour across the state, hearing from the different municipalities, the different jurisdictions about what the housing needs are across the state. That committee was chaired by Senator Michelle Reynolds, and it's now a standing committee within the Senate. And so through that effort, one of the things we heard was around the shortage and the need for additional, more creative options for new development across the state. And so most recently in September, Senate Bill 250, which is referred to as the Promised Land Act, was introduced by Senator Michelle Reynolds. We had spoken to the senator initially just around sort of the idea of what that bill might look like. And what it does, it really would support some of the other initiatives that are going on across the state. It authorizes a non-refundable but transferable tax credit for eligible nonprofits, which includes houses of worships and nonprofit organizations that are mission-driven. It's expected that it would have a $25 million GRF fund associated with it. It authorizes up to a 10% for the total cost of the project, including both construction expenses and land value. And it's expected to really incentivize single family housing at the way that it's currently drafted, though I think there's some conversations going on across the state whether that can be expanded. We're really excited about what the bill can do in terms of supporting some of the initiatives around zoning reform across the state and our FBDI work in Cuyahoga County. And going forward, we expect, so far the bill has gotten 4 hearings with very positive testimony, including support from Enterprise. And we expect that it will move through to another committee next year. And our hope is to really bring folks together to educate them around the impact of the bill, make sure that folks are coming out to advocate for, to have their voices heard, and really just create some momentum to garner support as the bill moves through the legislature. So with that, I'm going to pass it over to Patrick in New York.
Thanks so much, Hazel. Really appreciate it. Thanks so much to everybody for being here. In New York, over the past 12 months, there's been a lot of impactful land use actions taken in New York City that would really have an outsized impact for faith organizations that have land and housing here, have church land here in the city. One is the City of Yes zoning text amendments that we will be celebrating the 1-year anniversary of the passage of tomorrow, actually, which did a number of things around allowing more zoning flexibility, allowing more density, more housing typology all around the city, reducing some parking requirements that added a great deal of cost to development. But probably the most impactful zoning text amendment for the faith organizations that we work with in Enterprise New York from our faith cohort and that we hear about is one of the changes around some of the infill requirements on campus or parking lot land. And so a great deal of faith organizations have church or other types of land which have parking lots or other kind of campus or open space on the parcel of land. And so one of the zoning text amendments passed through the City of Yes initiative allows for development in a much more streamlined as of right way on those parcels, provided that the housing that's created sort of conforms with other housing topologies in the vicinity. So certain setback rules and density rules that were in place, which really prevented housing from being feasible in those parking lot or campus infill sites, is now allowable under City of Yes. And so at Enterprise, we worked very hard to ensure the advancement of the City of Yes zoning text amendments, working very closely with our faith cohort organization called Bricks and Mortals, which is an advocacy organization around faith-based organizations in the real estate space, to really kind of uplift the importance of that for faith organizations. In New York City alone, there's 5.5 million square feet of vacant surface parking lot area, which, if fully unlocked for housing, could yield around 22,000 units of housing altogether. So that's a tremendous amount. A lot of that is church land around New York, and we're very excited about the possibilities for that. Additionally, beyond the City of Yes zoning text amendments, in this past mayoral election, we had a number of charter revision commission ballot proposals get advanced, which would provide additional pathways for development. And so, one thing that we've understood from working with faith organizations in New York in their development process and providing them technical assistance through our FBDI program is that just the length of development, the approvals, the permitting, the land use processes, it's a huge barrier really for any small and emerging developer for getting projects executed in a timely and cost-efficient way, but certainly for faith organizations looking to execute on this, sometimes for the first time. And it's a very complicated, convoluted process. And so what these zoning text amendments did was a few things. And the most impactful, I think, for faith organizations is that it creates a fast track for affordable housing in community districts around the city, which historically have underbuilt affordable housing or development in their areas. So it takes metrics and tracking through a fair housing framework that the city council has advanced, and said if you're one of the basically 1/3 of the city of New York that really has closed off housing, closed off development in your district, affordable housing projects that get proposed in those areas now get a fast track through the development process. And, that's sort of a way to combat areas who were saying, not in my backyard to affordable housing. And there's other sort of, anti-NIMBY, if you will, measures in there where projects that didn't have the support of the city council member in that area, but, might be a great affordable housing project from a citywide perspective, they have additional avenues to seek approval, and it's not sort of automatically a veto from that city council member. So, notwithstanding all the great work that faith organizations do, affordable housing creators do, there's still remained a lot of barriers in terms of the time frame for getting projects advanced and some of the NIMBYism that they faced. And so these Charter Revision Commission ballot proposals that went before voters are meant to address that in a way that will speed development and bring more housing into the fold. And, we were very encouraged to see those get approved by very impressive margins in New York City. And, I think most voters, most people in New York really understand the value of affordable housing and made that clear when they voted, basically 2-1 across these measures, with a lot of institutional opposition to their passage. So, between the City of Yes, the Charter Revision ballot proposals, that's going to unlock a lot more housing and provide a lot more pathways for faith organizations to be able to be part of that process. And, the final thing I'll mention is that we continue to be advocates for the Faith-Based Affordable Housing Development Act here in New York, which is a bill that would add more zoning flexibilities for faith organizations around the whole state. Those two measures I spoke of already are specific to New York City. So this would add some more zoning flexibilities for faith land around the whole state of New York. Outside of New York City, faith organizations control 8,100 properties, totaling more than 17,000 acres of land. So a huge potential for even a small percentage of those properties that do want to explore housing development. And there's a lot of zoning and other barriers around that in areas outside New York City that we continue to explore avenues. So we'll continue to support that as we enter a new legislative session here in New York to try to add to the rest of the state some of the steps New York City has taken to make the process a little easier for faith organizations. And with that, I'll turn it over to my colleague, Alexander Miles.
Thank you, Patrick. I'm excited to speak about the Yes in God's Backyard, or YIGB legislation that passed earlier this year in the state of Florida. In the Sunshine State, we, like other states, have been confronted with increase in affordability issues. Specifically after the pandemic, Florida had a large influx of new arrivals, which exacerbated those housing affordability issues that we were struggling with, especially in dense parts of the state. So as part of that, the state tried to think creatively about ways to address some of these issues. Back in 2023, the state started passing legislation and subsequently updating it through what some might know as the Live Local Act outside of Florida. And in its 2025 iteration, the some partners, just like Enterprise, were looking at ways to think creatively about bringing in new ways to help combat the unaffordability basically in Florida and create more supply. One of the ways that ourselves and partners identified was through land owned by houses of worship. Specifically, it's estimated that throughout the state of Florida, there are about 30,000 parcels owned by houses of worship, and those parcels basically couldn't be developed in a way that really could meet the need in a quick way due to local zoning challenges. And so, because of that, the state legislature started to think creatively, as did we at Enterprise and others, about how to incorporate something about Yes in God's Backyard legislation in the 2025 update to the major piece of land use legislation. That legislation was Senate Bill 1730, and it passed earlier this year on July 1st when it was signed by the governor. And basically, what that legislation does is it's the state of Florida giving the different local governments across the state the ability to either via case by case or with an implementing ordinance allow houses of worship to build housing on their land if there is an actual structure like a church or mosque or temple, and that land can be contiguous. Apart from that, affordability was put into the legislation as a floor. So there's a mandate of 10% of the units that are built on that faith-owned property must be affordable. In Florida terms, that's from 120 AMI and down. And local governments, should there be an implementing ordinance or via case by case, can tailor that affordability. In other words, they can lower the threshold down from 120% AMI or increase the requirement from 10% of units to, let's say, 30% or 40%. They can also, within their jurisdiction, tailor that that ordinance, should they decide to pass an ordinance, to certain parts of their community that possibly might need it the most. One of the things that we worked on and tried to advocate for is that the necessity, or try to get the word out about, I should say, is the necessity to put forth an ordinance, given that with an ordinance, it provides greater clarity to houses of worship. It provides greater clarity to those seeking to develop on those lands, and to the community at large when they think about their planning. Apart from that, the state was very clear with this legislation that this was not a preemption. It was a tool through Senate Bill 1730, this YIGB tool that was in the bill, that they were giving to local governments, municipalities and counties across the state to consider to address their unique local housing challenges. And I mentioned how those local governments could tailor that legislation should they so choose. And it's been something that we know will be impactful and will help across the state. Apart from that, one of the things I wanted to highlight was how Enterprise helped to work with partners to help to encourage the incorporation of YIGB legislation. Myself and others in coalition that we worked with, like the Florida Housing Coalition, for example, went up to the state capitol in Tallahassee and specifically advocated when we heard a new land use bill was coming forward. We specifically advocated for the inclusion of YIGB legislation. And it ultimately was incorporated and helped to pass. And then apart from that, just looking forward, one of the things we're working on now is really getting the word out. Now that the state has passed this law, it now falls to those local jurisdictions and local communities to really take up that work and put in a local implementing ordinance. So just some quick updates. Yesterday, the city of St. Petersburg, Florida, in Central Florida, close to Tampa, just passed a local implementing ordinance for YIGB. It was the first local jurisdiction to do that since the passage of the state law on July 1st. And next week, on December 11th, the City of Miami City Commission, with work that Enterprise did to bring this to their attention, will be voting on their own local ordinance to implement pro-YIGB legislation. Those are just two municipalities here in Florida that are moving forward with this great new tool, and we're looking to continue to get the word out across the Sunshine State, and really encourage communities to use it in a way that makes sense, in given their unique housing challenges. And with that, I'd like to pass it along to my colleague Kinsey.
Thank you so much, Alex. Good afternoon. Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Kinsey Hasted, and I'm the Director of State and Local Policy for Enterprise out in Colorado with our beautiful gold-domed capital in Denver. And I'm here to tell a little bit of a story that is a try again story. So in Colorado, our Governor, Jared Polis, has really prioritized housing and housing affordability in the recent years in his leadership in office. Last year, we saw a whole raft of statewide land use and zoning reform bills pass, things that my colleagues have mentioned in their own states and jurisdictions, ranging from encouraging transit-oriented development to encouraging ADUs in different municipalities and reducing or eliminating parking minimums throughout the state. In another step forward on that effort to really try to reduce red tape and facilitate the development of new affordable housing, the legislature and the governor took up a YIGB type bill this year in the legislature. I do also want to make sure to give credit where credit is due to some of our colleagues in the faith community out in Colorado, and one of my colleagues in particular, Jessica Dominguez with Abundant Ground. They really approached a legislator early on in the process, having really had the desire to create more affordable housing on property owned by faith-based institutions and encountering some NIMBYism in different communities, and really just needing to cut a little bit more red tape and make it a little bit easier to develop the housing. So I think this year there was kind of those two forces combined into House Bill 1169, which is linked in the slides, which I'm sure you'll all get. So this bill was considered by the legislature this year. It would have required local jurisdictions to allow qualifying faith-based institutions and public school districts and public universities and colleges to utilize what's called an administrative review process in seeking to develop their land into housing. So basically kind of a use by right idea, and enabling land owned by qualifying institutions to be developed a little more rapidly and a little less costly. However, fast forward to the end of our legislative session, and this year's bill actually failed to pass the Senate. It passed the House, but didn't make it through the Senate. There were a number of concerns floating around in Colorado. One was some concerns around the potential for religious discrimination by faith-owned, faith-based institutions and the housing they might develop. Colorado is also a very strong home rule state, where local governments seek to really influence a lot of their housing and zoning decisions. I will also say that Enterprise and many of our fellow advocates in the housing affordability space, we're very glad to have the chance to work with faith-based partners and the lead legislator in governor's office this year in putting in some affordability requirements into the type of housing that qualifying institutions could develop. Ultimately, we wish they could have been more robust than they were, even as we got to a good place of agreement. So now that that bill has tried and ultimately failed this year, we do expect the lead legislators from this year's legislation and the governor's office to bring a similar but expanded bill back in 2026. The way that the bill is being revamped is actually not focusing on the YIGBY moniker in an effort to kind of move away from some of the religious concerns, religious discrimination concerns, and is taking a different approach to qualifying organizations and affordability. So in recognition of the expertise that exists among developers and nonprofits who have demonstrated experience in developing affordable housing, the qualifying entities for next year's bill will actually be, first and foremost, those organizations and land that they own. We are currently exploring the potential for faith-based entities and others to partner with organizations that have demonstrated experience in affordable housing to be able to also avail themselves of this administrative review process. And rather than trying to figure out exact affordability requirements, we are looking to the expertise and missions of the qualifying organizations and the existing affordability requirements that will come with public funds that will almost certainly have to be utilized for the development of this land to really ensure that there is affordability in homes that are developed using this process and that those homes are meeting demonstrated community needs. So we look forward to staying up with that and letting you all know how 2026 goes. And with that, I'm going to hand it back to my colleague, Flora, to close us out.
Thank you, Kinsey. Well, I really hope that this was helpful for the audience to see how advocacy can be such a critical tool in advancing faith-based development and how we work very closely in partnership and with coalitions to get the work done. So I thank my co-panelists, and David, we will turn it back to you.
Many thanks, Flora, and to the entire team for the state and local policy presentation. Very interesting information, and would encourage everyone who's on the line as you were hearing what was being shared today, that you feel free to go to the enterprisecommunity.org website and pull up, if you're in any of the areas where you heard presentations being done. We have market offices, obviously, in all these areas, and you can find contact information for our local offices. If you'd like to explore more about what Enterprise's work is in the area in general, or to drill down on some of what you heard today. So now we are excited to transition to our first case study panel. Our aim with our two case study discussions today is to allow you in the audience to hear directly from congregations and members of their development team about how they got it done or are getting it done. We've asked the teams to take about 10 to 12 minutes to walk through some slides that will provide an overview of their project. When they are done with the presentation, we'll transition to a dialogue with the team. The theme of getting it done is well represented with this first effort that we'll hear about from California. From the Glad Tidings International Church of God in Christ effort, we have Bishop Jerry Macklin, who is the founder and pastor of the church, Landis Graydon, CEO and founder of DCG Strategies, Jonathan Logan Jr., who is the founder and managing principal of JDL Strategies, and Dr. Benita McLaren, board member of Glad Tidings Community Development Corporation. I will turn it over to the team to be able to walk through the slides, and once they are done with the slides, we will come back, myself, and I'll be joined by a co-moderator for some question and dialogue. So Bishop Macklin and the team, I will turn it over to you with the slides.
Thank you very much. I hope I'm coming across clear.
Yes, sir, you are.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the great work that you do and your team. Of course, I know some of the members of your team, and phenomenal what you all are doing. Thank you for pioneering such great work in the way that you do, and for including Glad Tidings. Glad Tidings is here in Hayward, California. We are south of well, I guess you'd say, yeah, of Silicon Valley is south of us, and Oakland is on the other side, going the other way. We're right here in the middle of the Bay Area. Hayward, California is a city of about 180,000, I guess, something like that, 190,000 people. This community where we are is called South Hayward. South Hayward was a forgotten neighborhood, so to speak, where we are. When we moved here and the church moved here, we've been here 47 years, and Hayward 44 years here in this neighborhood. When we came, the neighborhood was fine, was okay, moderate. Going forth, crack cocaine showed up, turned this neighborhood into a war zone, and pretty soon it was a forgotten neighborhood. Nobody wanted it. It was just a place people came. We had 100% turnover in our immediate neighborhood almost every year. People moved in as a last resort, moved out. As a result of that, housing was completely thrown up in the air. Glad Tidings stepped in and said, the light shines brightest where it's darkest. And as a result of that, put together a strategy and a vision going forward that said, can we do this? We can. And therefore, we took ownership of this neighborhood when it was just at its very worst. And as a result of that, we realized if we were going to turn this neighborhood around, it was going to require for us to have people who had ownership opportunities in this neighborhood. So when you went to city council and other meetings, there were people that did that. Next slide, please. Thank you very much. As a result of that, we began buying up properties that we could buy up that were really broken down properties, houses here and there, duplex here and there, etc. We ended up moving forward in that direction, and then eventually put up what we call 50 pillars of light that became the pillars around this entire neighborhood, that became the viewpoints for people to know that that's where the church was taking over property. As a result of that, we began to look at what properties can we take that we can turn into housing opportunities. And the first one that we did, Spring Court, we actually did in partnership with somebody else. It was 32 units. And the first 16 families that went in there, these were condominiums. Nobody wanted to buy in because of the neighborhood. We took 16 families from the church, put them in there, bought them at about $100,000 a piece or something like that. And of course, they sold them for several $100,000 later on because the church was built that. We then built a brand new sanctuary, a church, a large building, right in the center of this neighborhood, and continued to expand our housing work. The next part of that, if I can go to the next slide for a moment, would be great. Next slide, please. Began that work. Down on the right-hand corner of the picture that you're looking at is what's called Glad Tidings Arms, 8 affordable condominiums. These were 2 buildings that were abandoned, so to speak, had been condemned. The church partnered and went to the city and said, hey, we want to save this. We want to turn these into condominiums. They said, you're crazy. Nobody will take that. But they were turned into model units. In terms of that, there were 4 on each one. We were able to turn those into home ownership opportunities. And it was gated, which was unusual for our neighborhood to have a gated community. But they turned out, people said they couldn't believe it because that's where the drug lords actually operated from. But it became that. One of the things that became unique for us is whenever we took over a property, within 48 to 70 some hours later, we would work 24 hours around the clock to flip that property in terms of the way it looked from the outside while we began to put a program together to move it forward. So GT Arms was our first one. The other picture that you see in the upper part of this slide is called Faith Manor. It was 63 units, 2/3 of them were 3-bedroom, the others 2, obviously. They were so run down, they were called the Pink Palace. Nobody wanted them. Every 3rd house was a crack house, and the drug dealers controlled the entire street. You didn't go up and down this street without permission, so to speak. They controlled everybody that was there. They controlled who was moving in and out. It was a very bad situation. We were able to buy that property. I guess we're the explorers and kings of buying property with no money down. That property we purchased, I think, for $30,000 was the amount of money I had to come out of pocket with. But that's because the owner was willing to work with us. And I said to him, why don't you give this over to us, sell it to us? And I think we bought it for like $3 million. I think that's what it was, Landis, as I recall. And $2 million, they had an existing loan, and $1 million he carried. And we were able to pull that off. And then from that, the church actually handled that property for about 10 years on our own until we later would partner with Eden Housing, where we were able to partner with Eden to make this low to moderate income housing, which we may talk about a little bit later. But those 63 units, and then about 5 years ago, or 4 years ago, maybe it was now, 3 or 4 years ago, Eden put in about $8 or $9 million and turned that property into what it looks like now, which is a model. And people drive by because they can't believe what that looks like. But all of this took place because the church took ownership of the neighborhood. And it wasn't just one piece. It was a continuation of what was going on in there. These projects included multiple participants, Glad Tidings Church, of course, board members, sister nonprofit organizations, and all of us began to pull together. The question was not whether you had ability, but the real question to me was whether or not you had a heart to move forward. The development team, and you see a picture of some of the people that were there. We had so many people that partnered with us, that walked along with us, that allowed us to show them what could be. All right, this is what is, but this is what could be. And we believe that people deserve better, and I believe we could do better. And so our partnership with DCG Strategies, Landis Graydon, which of course everybody knows, but Landis came right out of this church. He became a member here early on in his walk with the Lord, and said to me, I want to do something. I want to do something. And as a result of that, but I say to people all the time, it's not just your ability, it's your heart. Do you have a heart? Can you see this? Do you believe this? Can you see which way this can go? And that became very, very important for us. And so we began to pull in people that can help us embrace the vision that we deserve better. We can do better. Next slide, please. All right. Thank you very much. Another project of Glad Tidings, when we went to work, and there are several others. I didn't even talk about Lancelot Court, which was 12 homes that had already been placed there and abandoned in a project, and they were going to tear them down. And I went to the city and said, I don't think I would do that if I were you. And we found out that there were some things that had happened that should not have happened. We were able to step in and bring people to the table and say, hey, we know some people that will help us. We turned that into a model project. Later on, Washington, D.C., Nick Racconcini, I'm trying to think of his name is correctly, from Harvard and others, with the Clinton Administration, gave us an award for this to the city for creative housing. It turned out to be a great thing, but it was property that people thought was no good. But the church was able to say, I see something, and we began to tag that property as possible. In addition to that, which is not on this screen, was a piece of land across the street. All of this is within a 2 or 3 block area, by the way, across the street, which was an abandoned gas station. We found out later on that Chevron Oil was responsible for that, went to Chevron and said to them, we have a good idea for you. You need to clean this up. And we had a little disagreement about it, but a few minutes later, they saw the light and came and cleaned it up. That became the gateway to this community. It became the gateway. Now, one of the things that was going to be needed is, what do we do to anchor this? We have the church, we have the family life, the fellowship hall. But the next thing was, let's provide for this neighborhood. A family life center, a place that people can come to, a place that can serve the neighborhood. We use the funds to a large degree. We use the funds as we partnered with Eaton Housing, and they purchased our property here to turn that into that. We used some of those funds were designated to build this center, and it's now open. That was obviously not enough to build it all, but it was enough to get us started. And we began then to partner with others to help us get this done, particularly with the congregation. And so that family life complex now is a standout in this neighborhood. It's absolutely a first-class presentation of what can be done and what was done as a result of that. And this entire community now is literally gathering around this along with the other housing. So we bought up parking lots, we bought up empty houses that we turned to parking so that we could support this kind of thing, and then continued to buy up property that we could turn around. And now this neighborhood that was once literally despised by everybody, the street has been named Glad Tidings Way. And as a result of that, this entire neighborhood is now called the campus, and it's Glad Tidings Campus, as a result of partnering with housing, providing services that were critical for what needed to be done. And most recently, we've partnered with Green the Church, which you can look up, Gemini Solutions as well. And now a complete solar neighborhood has come online. And we are now have solar on almost all of the buildings here in terms of the church's properties that are here, and are now introducing EV charging stations have been placed on the campus. We're not quite ready to start charging cars, but they're there, and people are excited about it. And in the front door, right near where the EV charging stations are on both of our campuses, North and South Campus, there are these 2 stores that are getting ready to go. One of them is open already just on Sundays, and they're like a Starbucks kind of thing, where people, while they're getting their cars charged right here in our neighborhood, will allow us to provide services for them in terms of food and sandwiches and that kind of thing. And all of this is taking place right here in a neighborhood that has come to life And people have, in this resilience hub, are now looking to us to be able to do this. And by the way, people can now buy electric cars in our neighborhood because now they'll have a place to recharge them, and it shows up on your phone on the freeway, which is just about 3 or 4 blocks away. So that is the story in a nutshell of what has happened. I'm so thankful for people like Dr. Benita. Yes, thank you so much, Dr. McLaren, and of course Landis. Thank you so much, and Larry Moody, the president of our board. So much work has been done by so many people, and we are appreciative of what has happened here and the partnership that we've had with nonprofits who joined in with us, who now see the light, and a community that was thrown away because of housing opportunities that have been provided here, and because of the perspective of the future, now are turning us and saying, we want to use this, we want to come here. And now where people wouldn't come, we have people coming by the hundreds to this campus every single week to use the facilities that are here. And the people that live in the housing have a whole new perspective on what life looks like as a result of this work. So I hope I've done that within the time allotted. And if not, I'll answer more questions as we go along. But thank you so much for joining us, and to our team, thank you, everybody. Appreciate you so much.
Bishop, you're right on time, right in time, sir. We appreciate you so much and for walking us through those slides. And I want to say to everyone, as I begin to introduce my co-moderator, we will be sending out a recording of this entire event. And so the content folks will have and will see that's in this recording. But I'm pleased to be joined by a co-moderator for our Q&A dialogue here with the panel, Patrick Jordan. Patrick is the president of Heron Community Consulting. He has an exemplary record of service in his career, from a high school teacher, service at HUD, working in over 100 communities while here at Enterprise, to his current work through his own company, Heron Community Consulting. And of real note, Patrick was a key creator of the Enterprise Faith-Based Development Initiative curriculum, that 20 hours of content that has really been critical in equipping folks around the country. And he's provided instruction to a number of cohorts around the country. So I'm pleased to be joined by Patrick here for our dialogue with the team. So Bishop and others, let's jump into it with some questions that Patrick and I have that we hope will tease out some more of the details of the story. So Bishop, we'll start with you and ask you, how was your vision and the project plan developed? And if you could talk a little bit about how you engaged the congregation and how you engaged the community.
Thank you very much. I think that the challenges that we presented actually brought about the strategic plan that was there. The question was, what can we do about what we see and what we feel? What can we do about that? And as those hard questions begin to be asked, and we attempted answers of that, that really rolled us out into a strategic plan that said all things are possible. And we began to look at that from that perspective, and the congregation caught hold of that and said, we are here for this purpose. We're here to make a difference. We're not here to insulate ourselves from the problem, but we're here to be a conduit for answers so that the problems can be solved. And that's really what led us into this. And we kept saying light shines brightest where it's darkest, and which led to the writing of that book eventually, once that we got on target with all of this, which had to do with the canvas of tomorrow, painting on that canvas and believing that if our circumstances are going to change, we have to take the brush of faith, paint in vibrant living color on the canvas of our tomorrow. The congregation had to paint it, and now the community had to begin to believe that that can be done. And if you drive around this community very quickly, you will find flags all over this community on all the properties. So when you drive here, you know that you're in a community that believes that hope is here to stay.
Bishop, could you say a word more about that work of engaging the community? Some of the people in the audience are at houses of worship who run into that, not in my backyard, that NIMBYism. How did you reach out to engage, you and the congregation, the community, and do that work where they were part of the vision, part of making it all work, and became strong allies in the work?
I'll tell you, the story comes from a person, from the founder of our denomination, Bishop C.H. Mason, who went to visit a pastor one time who kept saying, I've got this church, you got to see it, you got to see it. It was way out, takes the train, goes out to see the young man, and he says, I got this church, it's painted, I've got this, I've got that, I've got all these new pews. And so the bishop says, well, wait a minute, why don't you let me walk for a minute? I've been on the train, and they walk one block this way, one block this way, one block this way, one block back. When he gets back, the bishop turns around and says to him, young man, he said, yes, bishop. He said, close this church up and go help the man up the street. You don't need this here. And the young man was devastated. He said, why? And the bishop gave this answer, which I have shared 100 times around the world. He said, I've walked with you one block this way, this way, this way, this way. Nobody knows your name. He said, therefore, close up. I don't need to go in your building. That's been our key. Who knows your name? And that caused us to have church outside of the building, to walk around this neighborhood every single day, and to have members that walk this neighborhood with us. And we meet everybody. And I walk up to people, as Ernie Morris, my friend from Philadelphia, would say at Mount Airy. I walk up to people and say, hi, I'm Jerry Macklin. I'm your pastor. How you doing? And so I don't wait for people to join me. I join them. And I tell them, you're a part of this story because you live on my campus. Once you take ownership, the community literally begins to gravitate toward you because you gravitate toward them.
And Bishop, that may lead to the part of the answer to this next question, which is what led you and the church to decide to do mixed use development? You all have multiple projects, housing, community, facility, family life center. You got the green space and the resilience hub. What has led over time and informed you all to decide, hey, we're going to not just do housing or not just do a facility, we're going to do mixed use?
I think it was because we were looking at what can we do to turn this into a community? What can we do that people can buy into? And so we saw this not as a housing project, but as a community empowerment project. What can we do to turn this neighborhood into a community? And in a community, you have mixed use. You have this, that, and the other. That all helps to make up the community. What can we do to strengthen all of those areas? That's what led us this way. That's why it's not just one project. That's why it's all inclusive in what we've had to do here. And because we were looking at what can we do to turn this into a community that people can be proud of.
Great. Patrick?
Bishop Macklin, that was fascinating. I think you showed us a picture in your slides of your team of Glad Tidings members. How did you go about building your internal team, the team of church members that were going to be involved within your projects?
You know, I tried to listen for people's hearts. And as I shared the vision, I tried to listen for the heart of people who said, you know what, not only do I see that, but I feel that. And as our moderator was saying at the very beginning about Nehemiah, I don't want to get in on his sermon, that was his sermon. But one of the things about Nehemiah was that when he went to the city and he went there and he showed up, he went at night and he told the people that were there, come walk with me. Let's take a look at what's going on. And when he walked with people, they saw the city different than when they were walking on their own. And I think a leader has to point out this is what could be. And as I heard the heart of people, people would say to me, I got this. I want to do this. That's it. That's it. Then I knew I had a person that could be a part of our team because you don't just have to see it. You're not just required to see it. You've got to feel it. Yeah. And when I heard people's hearts, I said, okay, you ought to be with me.
So you've looked at folks' hearts and asked who is in this within our church partners. You've also done work that's engaged other development partners. What was your approach for kind of finding the right development partner, both for the housing work and for the Family Life Center?
I think the key again is getting people to see what's here. I did not have much success at just sending out proposals and telling people about it. I seem to have more success, as Dr. Benita, Brother Larry Moody, and others could tell you, by getting people to come here. This campus is spread out. We have about 3 golf carts that we use to circle around this community every day. I just needed to get people on this campus, and I would drive around this and do this tour, which took about 30 minutes or so, and maybe longer, Landis, as I would think about it. And I would say, this is this is this what could be, this will be, look at what this is. And then their eyes would come open and say, God, I see it. I said, okay, now let's talk. But if they can't see it, they're not ready to move with it. And they can see it better when you walk them through it. And getting them on the campus seems to be the key to doing that.
We need to encourage folks to get a golf cart ministry. So Landis, let me come to you, if I may, with a question. There was discussion about the decision that had been made to sell the housing to Eden Housing. Landis, maybe you could talk about a little bit of what was behind that decision, maybe you and Bishop tag teaming, but also were there any stipulations and covenants that required Eden to keep the housing affordable to folks that are either low income or low and moderate income, folks at a certain income level? Maybe speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so, and I also just want to touch on just a couple of the things you were just discussing because, Bishop is authentic. I'll say that first and foremost. He walks the talk.
Mm.
And he doesn't really talk, he prays, and then he does what God tells him to do. And so he then looks for the culture fits, and that's where Eden comes in. Bishop is always making sure that whoever is partnering with it doesn't matter what your bank account, it doesn't matter your pedigree, it doesn't matter what your branding is. If you don't have a heart for the people, then you're not a good culture fit for us. And so when the church acquired Faith Manor, it was purely out of community economic development, affordable housing, and the rents were kept below market, and the church subsidized those residents for over a decade on its own. The church could have monetized that property many different ways to leverage the opportunity that equity had, but the church bishop's vision was we have to provide people a safe, affordable place to live. And so the property had run to its useful life. And then we started moving internally as a team to syndicate it ourselves internally. And so we literally finished our entire tax credit application process, which took us over a year to put together the investors and the sponsors. And for those of you who know tax credits, we did that as a church. Bishop prayed some more and decided that it would be opportune to unlock some of the equity to reinvest in the campus for those projects that needed to be brought to light. And so we started weighing the pros and the cons of continuing through, this 15-year resyndication period and what that meant versus finding a partner who would not only preserve the culture and the story of what Glad Tidings is, but that we trusted. And more importantly, where Glad Tidings remained as part of that general partnership, so even though on paper, it's a transaction that says it's a sale to Eden, Glad Tidings is still part of the general partnership, part of the ownership group of Faith Manor. Eden operates it. California changed some laws a few years ago where you have to have certain requirements in order to operate affordable housing property. So Eden became a natural fit for the church. And then Glad Tidings also participates. So there's another project right across the street. It was really the only independent project in the community that Glad Tidings didn't have a relationship in. But Glad Tidings is also a GP in that property as well. So literally Glad Tidings Way is all Glad Tidings influenced property. So Eden became a partner and a good community operator. So it became really an easy decision for the church to say, yes, we'll partner with Eden. We will take some of the equity out now, reinvest it into other priorities going forward. But it was very much a culture fit.
That's great. Thanks, Lane. I think that transitions to the next question Patrick has for us.
Thanks, David. So, Bishop, maybe for you to hand off as you see fit. Well, you worked with a development partner. How did you go about financing the housing component? How did you go about financing the Family Life Center? What was your approach for kind of developing the capital stack?
All right. Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? I will tell you, we did not have the money to do this. All right. We just stepped out by faith and said, we're going to get this done. And we waited, and the Lord said, now's the time. And we just got started. The church, of course, Glad Tidings, a wonderful congregation, 47 years as pastor here. I can tell you, their heart is in this. When I stepped up and said, folks, we got to put some money up over the next few months. We got to get started building this building. People came forward and started donating and giving and giving and giving, which gave us what we needed to get started. Once we got this started, we found other people who were supportive of nonprofits in terms of houses of worship, who also came alongside to help us in big ways. All right. And people began to use their influence to help bring them to the table to where we were. And before you know it, we were down the road, but it was really a faith walk. And I don't think there's any classes at Harvard that would teach you to do that. I'm sure we did everything wrong, but it worked. All right. And people stepped up. Next thing you know, money started coming in from place to place. And so faith was really the factor that made this work. And we would get right to the deadline, and then money would show up. We get right to the deadline, money would show up again. And I'm not sure you can teach that. But that's the way it was. And so faith made a big part of this. But this congregation, I would always say, do all we can do. God will handle the rest. All right. Do all you can do. God will handle it. And that's exactly what happened. People started putting in. And before long, everybody wants to be a part of a great story. Mm-hmm. Everybody wants to say, hey, I was a part of that. And so we tried to give people opportunity to do that.
Excellent. Jonathan, I was hoping to ask you, working with houses of worship, you've probably seen some challenging roadblocks that churches face and nonprofits. How have they overcome them, and what are some of those kind of common challenges that you see in a process like this?
Thank you for the question. Real estate value is all about location, location, location. And I would say overcoming roadblocks to development for churches and nonprofits, it really comes down to capacity, capacity, and capacity. The most challenging roadblock that churches often face is the lack of capacity as it relates to development. On the spiritual side, A1, real estate development, unless you have folks on your board or within your congregation with that experience, the capacity will be a huge challenge. Many congregations are sitting on incredibly meaningful pieces of land, but that land also comes with the challenges. It could be rezoning, it could be neighborhood resistance to new housing. Many sites are just physically difficult to build on, and some sit in really high cost markets. So the first hurdle in developing property is really starting to shape a deep clarity around how housing development aligns with the ministry and with the church's mission. And Bishop articulated very well how, in this case, he saw a need. The congregation saw a need right around their place of worship. And so once you have that clarity, I think the next step is really to understand what can the land around you actually support. And you have to have capacity to answer that question. And so when I think about capacity, it really boils down to three things: experience, expertise, and leadership and governance as one final component. And as it relates to experience, most churches have never developed housing before. Expertise, real estate finance, legal, community engagement. These are all really specialized fields that many churches and other places of worship, they don't have that expertise in-house. And then the final, leadership and governance, is really about having a clear vision and the heart and courage to pursue that vision, along with boards and the governing structures that would enable you to make those timely and informed decisions about which direction to go in. The good news is churches don't have to build all of that expertise in-house. The way that I've seen these barriers overcome is by building strong partnerships. Many have been articulated in this presentation, but every community has similar institutions and potential partners for bringing these projects to life. And so I would say bringing in a really strong, trusted advisor, someone with development expertise and relationships, identifying a strong development partner. Landis mentioned Eden Housing, really strong, made sense for the community. There was a culture's fit with the church. And then I would say lastly, churches and other faith-based institutions, building your own internal expertise as you go along. So investing in board education so that the final decision makers ultimately have the information and the knowledge to make sure that they're making the best decisions in the interest of the churches or institutions' mission. And what I'll just end on for this question is capacity is not about doing everything on your own, but it's really about surrounding yourself with the right people and setting up the right structure so you can move forward effectively and efficiently.
So in terms of those right people and right structures, that was a great description of kind of the capacity that's often maybe not natural for a house of worship as they're just starting out development and building that capacity. What are some key assets you think houses of worship kind of often do have that support development, maybe relational or financial or expertise that you think they could utilize to help advance their project and build that capacity?
Yeah, I think initially, not initially, but right off the bat, your land has a tremendous amount of value, and you should never undersell that. And the land is often the initial key that unlocks the entire project. It lowers the cost. It helps you to attract partners. And one of the most important things is it makes financing of your project more feasible. And so in many cases, your land is going to be put up as equity for your project.
Mhm.
So don't sell yourself short as you start to talk with partners, development partners about, your role and your assets and what you bring to the table. Don't undersell the value of the land. Um, as I mentioned before, you don't have to become a housing developer to create housing. So really find a mission aligned development partner that becomes another really strong asset that you can acquire. And they will help to bring financing to the table, development capacity and expertise, project management skills. Those are all things that a really great development partner will bring, and it really helps to change the game. The third and final, I would say, is leverage your local and regional and even state and national relationships. Churches are deeply embedded in the communities that they serve, and that's a major advantage. You have city and counties that can help with zoning and reducing fees for the project and just making a particular project important by talking about it, acknowledging that it happened. So leverage those relationships. I would also say local philanthropy is another source of support. They provide grants. They can also provide guarantees for loans. And then program related investments, which are essentially low cost patient capital in the form of a loan with really friendly terms. And then finally, we're here with Enterprise, so I would be remiss if I didn't mention CDFIs and local banks. So being able to tap into community development, financial institutions that can provide capital, can provide technical assistance and other supports. I would say use all of these folks that ultimately lands on your organization, your church's balance sheet, if you will, of support for the project. And the bottom line is churches have more assets than what they might often realize. But if you think about the land, the people, the trust that the church has built over time and the relationships, and you combine those with the right partners with expertise, then you can really move projects from idea to actual impact.
Jonathan, that was a great description. Thank you.
Yeah, many
David?
thanks. Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Patrick, and thanks, Jonathan. Landis, are there any thoughts that you have on the impact? There's been a lot of attention. We talked about policy earlier today in the session about SB4, right? California's Yes in God's Backyard legislation that passed. Do you have any sense on how the impact that will have for houses of worship that are seeking to do development, having worked with a church that's done multiple types of development? What do you see as how that legislation will have impact for communities of faith trying to do development?
Yeah. So we see SB4 as a very favorable piece of legislation for houses of worship to be able to expedite the development process because it takes out the tension that you may see with local opposition, basically the NIMBY folks. And so there's a streamlining that happens with SB4. And where it really magnifies is when you have the local jurisdiction that also recognizes that, and then the church or the community organization works closely with the planning department on streamlining just the SB4 process. So you get in early, and then because you can take advantage of SB4, you can ask certain questions that would expedite your process. And so there's that early, a lot of these projects start with early vetting. And it's what we call in our shop is there or there. So not even though there's a piece of land doesn't mean the land is suitable for development. There are certain variables that we need to solve for: physical capacity, making sure that the financing can work, that there's just supportable infrastructure and amenities in the community. So there's all these other variables. And so with SB4, though, it does provide for an expedited process. What I will add is it's very helpful, even when a church is thinking, well, okay, we want to take advantage of SB4 potentially if you're in California. Taking the time to do the internal identity work internally, making sure that you have a clean website, making sure that you're documenting your team, even if it's an external group of advisors, making sure that you're documenting the story so that when you do then start inquiring about entitlements, people can easily see who you are. So what happens often is churches will start down, maybe they want to use SB4, they want to start going down the entitlement process, they want to jump out and start talking to partners. It's helpful to make sure that they are internally organized. So even though they may have assets, being able to have a clear and concise demonstration of just the story of the ministry, who your team is very important, because that then helps others kind of catch the vision. And so I liken it. So Bishop Macklin never sells anything. He just shares, right? He just shares and people catch it, who are supposed to catch it. And so SB4 is a tool that's effective if the story is in place to share, because the local jurisdiction wants to see housing units come up. But if there are roadblocks because maybe there's just misorganization internally, then those things can be avoided. So we like SB4. We think it's a valuable tool. We want more folks to take advantage of. There are some limitations and some restrictions, but it is a very viable tool.
Thanks so much. Oh yeah, go ahead, Bishop.
No, thank you very much. I wanted to kind of pass over to Dr. Benita McLaren to talk about the impact of this in terms of how this has now become a resilience hub and what that means, and how the city now even looks at this in that direction and says, anything happens, this is where everybody in this neighborhood goes. And the city of Hayward has been great working with us from the very beginning. And I'm very, very thankful for their support through each administration. But now we're at a point of a resilience hub as a result of this housing development, a result of the other development. And maybe Dr. Benita can, who's kind of really been at the forefront of this in terms of our new complex, can maybe talk about that.
Dr. McLaren, please. And Dr. McLaren, even as you speak to that, which Bishop mentioned, the notion of how you're with the CDC, right? There's church, the Community Development Corporation, how the church and the CDC have contemplated additional development. To Bishop's point, hey, we're going to now do this. As you move forward, how did you make those kinds of decisions? And how are you contemplating maybe additional things in the future?
So yeah, I'll try to answer both of those. And if you know Bishop, yes, you know that, we are definitely exploring additional development opportunities. And but it is part of our and Bishop's vision to, continue to strengthen and uplift and support the community in South Hayward. Under Bishop Macklin's vision, we're assessing the potential for new housing on our properties that we already own, and evaluating the purchase of additional sites to expand access to safe, affordable housing in this neighborhood. Bishop Macklin's long-term vision continues to guide us toward projects that not only meet immediate needs, but also foster stability, dignity, and opportunity for church members and local community members, not just now, but into the future. And while we still we're still in exploratory phase for a lot of these projects, we remain committed to pursuing development that aligns with the vision and complements the commitment to uplift and empower the community. So absolutely, we're moving forward on more projects. And if you're with Bishop, you're not standing still. So we're always moving, always moving. Regarding our current relationships, Bishop's point about our current relationships with other community members, this all started, and he's already mentioned it today, but it all started with him even 40 plus years ago, being really committed to really, like he says, walking around the neighborhood, getting to know people, and really establishing himself in the neighborhood. And city officials, I mean, there was a time when the police department, well, it's what I've heard, I wasn't around, but what I've heard is the police department wouldn't even come to this community or was afraid to come to this community. And Bishop Macklin, because of his commitment, because of his determination, really changed that around and really became a really trusted partner with the police department early on and really gained their respect. And so his helping of transforming and rebuilding this community has really been, I think, key in those relationships. Most recently, he mentioned with the new Family Life Complex, one of his visions, and I always tell the story that, you know, I retired from being a community public health official, and I used to have to respond to every emergency that there was. Bishop told me when he opened up the new community center that he wanted it to be a resilience hub and be that place, trusted place where people could come to an emergency. And I said, Bishop, I retired from that. I'm out. And he laughed and said, that's nice, but we're still doing it. And so I really have so much respect for his commitment to the community. And through this new community center, Glad Tidings Family Life Complex, we have built this new resilience hub. We've partnered with the city of Hayward, the fire department, the American Red Cross, the city of Hayward, other departments in the city of Hayward, Alameda County Public Health, and all kinds of other partners who really have embraced and really are happy to have this new resource in South Hayward that didn't exist before. This place, not just the place, but people. We have church members and community members who have volunteered to get certified under the CERT, if you've heard of CERT, or Community Emergency Response Team. We have nurses that are part of the church who have just got certified with the American Red Cross to have a cardiac emergency response program, and on, all kinds of programming from disease education, diabetes and heart disease education, to STEM education for youth, financial literacy. So this idea of having ongoing daily programming as well as the ability to respond in times of emergency, I think has really also built even more trust and even more connection throughout the community. And we're getting a lot of positive feedback, and even more people, as Bishop mentioned, the more people that join you, the more people want to join you, is kind of what happens. So
yeah, momentum breeds momentum. Bishop, had a question for you, if I may, and just to the panel and others. So we've got about 7 minutes left, and we've actually got a couple of questions that popped in from the audience that, if it's okay, want to flag. One of the questions that came up, Bishop, that I'm going to ask you, and I may actually ask Landis and Jonathan to take this from a different perspective, but let me start with Bishop. The notion of getting comfortable with the risk of real estate development, the financial risk, liability risk, that kind of thing. Bishop, as you've gone on in this process, how did the church get comfortable with taking and deal with that risk?
All right, I'll answer that. I just want to request that I have a minute at the end of our presentation to ask you all a question that might be able to help us. So I'll just
absolutely.
Would you leave me a minute to do that?
Yes, sir.
I don't know if you ever become comfortable. I tell people all the time, comfort is not your friend. Few great things are ever accomplished when you're comfortable. It's when you're not comfortable that you're setting up the possibility of doing something great. And so to answer it, I don't think you ever get comfortable. When we pronounced it to the congregation and said we're going to do this here, there was not 100% vote of if everybody said, oh yeah, we're all comfortable with that. I don't think you ever become that. And I think that's where you all are faith-based. That's where faith comes in at, where you have to believe that this is what's right to do when you step out. I don't think that there's a comfort level that you get and say, well, we got a guarantee we can do this. There are no guarantees here. You just have to believe you're doing what's right and go forward. That's the answer to the first part. You had something else.
I'm going to ask a second question about timing, but before I do that, real quick, Landis or Jonathan, and you all's work with congregations, not just Glad Tidings. If that question came up, how should we as a congregation approach the issue around risk, financial risk. Landis, go ahead.
Yeah, so we can bifurcate it. So Bishop just articulated the decision itself to do this, and that's a faith-based process. And so sometimes that's a fear-driven kind of variable for ministries. Bishop just articulated that. Then I think you're also intimating what is the technical risk, right? The financial risk, the guarantees. We say those are all mitigatable. So really quickly, we believe a ministry should not sign an MOU, a development agreement, or anything unless they understand every single variable of the project beforehand. So anyone that comes in and says we want to negotiate exclusively or just sign this and it'll all work out. No, understand your financial performer from your perspective as a ministry, hire an architect yourself, do your own capacity study yourself. Understand what the resyndication period is. That's where ministries get in trouble because in 15 years, there has to be a disposition of the asset and bring in a lawyer. So really the ministry should vet the entire program themselves as though they were going to develop it independently. So then when they interview development partners, they know where all the numbers are, they understand where all the deal risks are, and then they go in with their eyes open, understanding what worst case scenario is before they make a commitment. And as Jonathan said, there are resources out there through philanthropic sources for grants, et cetera. So we always measure the entire program before ministries go, and if they're not comfortable, don't do it. And then the last risk is culture risk. A lot of people are really good salespeople. They have the great pictures, they have the great resumes, but they may not be the right fit. So that's where you have to pray and trust your instincts as well. If something is not right, there's something telling you that there's something just off, and don't move forward. Even if you have to wait a few years for the right thing to come around, so be it. Be very patient.
I just appreciate that. Bishop, I'm going to ask you the last question, then you've got a question for us. Someone asking the audience about timeline. From the time you kind of got started into where you are today with like the recent, grand opening in the last year or so, how long has this journey been of doing development, the housing, the facilities and all?
Oh man, this has been this has been 20 plus years, 25 years going. I'll leave you with my quote. It's not famous yet, but when I'm gone, you guys will refer to it a lot. And that is, go as far as you can see and you will see further. Go as far as you can see and you'll see further. Once you're at that point, you never see the whole thing up front. And you go as far as you can see. And I'm convinced that God will only entrust those he can trust. And so you go as far as you can see. And if you do that part, then you're going to see something else. You do that part, then you're going to see something else. But seldom will you see the entire thing all in advance. You're going to see part, you do that, go to the next part, you do your homework. Thank you, Landis. And thank you for helping us do that homework. And then you go from there. So that's it's been a long process. And if you're in a position where you have to be a hero overnight, this is not the kind of work you want to do.
That's a great quote. Don't be a hero overnight. Bishop, you said you had a question for us, and that'll be where we'll land the plane.
I have two of them, and you all can take a helicopter and get back to me later on them. It'll be just fine. All right. Number one, I want to know, have you all given any thought to how we turn, and that's that new bill that's come out, how do we turn properties that are apartment complexes that want to be condos, but do not want to incur the cost of having to move all them people out overnight? All right, and you have to pay for everybody to move everything else, then the project's not available. What has been done or what is being done to allow those to be brought online as people purchase them, where there'll still be apartments and yet condos are coming on as they come on a more natural basis? I'll take my answer in the future, but I leave that with you. We have a project right now, 20 units, and 8 of them we want to keep as apartments. The other 12 we want to turn into condominiums, but I am not in a position to move 12 families out and take the cultural hit for displacing people. And thank God Eaton didn't have to do that. But that's a real problem. That's number one. The other thing that I want you all to consider in the future, you can get back to us on that. Let me tell you why churches are often reluctant to give up their property. Help us to kind of overcome that. They're reluctant to give up their church property that they have paid for, worked for, sold dinners for, you name it. And they bought all this property back in the day. When you do give it over for construction, for new housing and everything else, oftentimes it goes into a kind of a project where everybody gets to bid on it or put their name into the basket. And the church that developed all that property, bought all that property, their members seldom get to participate in very much of that. So if you develop 20 or 30 units, their members may only get 2 or 3 of them out of the whole thing. That's what's holding back a whole lot of people, because they want their members to benefit from that in ways that will keep them in the community, which keeps the church alive and keeps it going. And so as you all look at this, you guys are brilliant. I got great respect for you. Think about that, because that may help us as we talk to other churches about releasing that land, particularly if their members can benefit from the housing that's going to go there. Long-term question, big-time problem, but I leave that with you so you have some homework.
Bishop, thanks for that. Any good teacher leaving folks with homework, so we appreciate that. And we'll approach that in a couple ways. One, we'll talk to colleagues and see what we can find out to that first question you asked. Secondly, there are folks who are dropping things in the Q&A. People can't see it across, but if there are people in the audience who have thoughts on that, feel free to drop that in the Q&A, and we'll kind of crowdsource if folks have ideas and thoughts there. And so we will definitely see what we pulled there and do some other homework on our own. For that second piece, I want to say something that co-sign on something Landis says, and it's something we constantly teach at Enterprise for our FBDI, which is a house of worship ought to make sure many things. One is know what their own interests are. So as it relates to the ownership, we tell people, do you want to maintain ownership or control of the land over the long term? Yes, no, maybe so. There's no right or wrong answer, but whatever the answer is, know what it is. And 2, make sure you have a real estate development lawyer or a land use lawyer who just represents the house of worship, so that your interests are negotiated and taken care of as you're moving through whatever the issues are around land ownership. We often tell folk, developers' frame of reference is quarterly. For the faith community, it's eternity. So oftentimes we sometimes have to speed up the faith community and slow down development community, but also the notion of we're here today. I may be 100 years from now, 200 years from now, 300 years from now, there literally will be folks potentially worshiping where you are now. And so making sure your interests that cross generations are looked out for. Listen, we've come to the end of our time. I want to say to the Glad Tidings team, Bishop and others, a huge word of thanks. There's a lot of positive talk in the Q&A about how you all have inspired folks. Some folks have put their info in. We'll make sure to get that to you. And I did want to end just by letting folks know, and thanks, Patrick, for holding it up, that Bishop, if you want to read more about this story, The Canvas of Tomorrow is a great inspirational read. I read it on a beach vacation, looking out at the ocean. And so, Bishop, I could only see the horizon, but now I know I need to go further so I can see further. That quote will carry. So God bless you all. Thank you for your work that you continue to do. For the folks who are in the audience, we have now reached, while it's a virtual webinar, we're going to have a 4-minute stretch break. So we encourage you to take 3 minutes and stretch, relax, do what you got to do. And in 4 minutes, we'll get started with our South Florida case study. Thank you again to Bishop and the Glad Tidings team. We'll take a 4-minute stretch break. So come back in 3. So we start in 4 and we'll be back soon. All right. Well, welcome back to the Enterprise Faith-Based Development Initiative Annual Summit. We were really inspired by the words we heard from the good folks from Glad Tidings Church of God in Christ, Bishop Macklin and others from that story. And so we're excited now. Our next case study panel comes to us from Miami, down in South Florida. We are excited about the Believers of Authority Ministry story because of the participation of groups here in the Enterprise Faith-Based Development Initiative South Florida cohort that was supported by the Wells Fargo Foundation we heard about earlier. So let me introduce Ellen Buckley, who is the founder and CEO of Prospera Real Estate Collective, Bernard Fernord, who is president and CEO of the Collective Empowerment Group of South Florida, and also Reverend Dr. Joaquin Willis, who is the founder and president emeritus of the Collective Empowerment Group of South Florida. And let me say that Joaquin is also the man whose pastoral mentorship guided me from the age of 7, whose vision around faith-based development planted seeds in me as a young college seminarian when he was talking about seed to harvest and doing development, and who continues to be an inspiration to me to this day. So Joaquin, honored to have you here in particular, but glad to have all of you here. And before we move on, let me note that Apostle John Chambers III was scheduled to be with us today, but unforeseen health issues are preventing him from being with us. So we lift up prayers for Apostle Chambers. So with that, I'm going to now turn it over to the team to go through the slide presentation. And then after that, we'll come back and get into our Q&A dialogue. So team, we'll turn over to you and just let us know when you need us to advance slides.
Good afternoon, everyone. Very good. So thanks again. I'm happy to be participating in this discussion about faith-based development and regarding the project Grand Bahamas Place anchored in Coconut Grove, Florida, and joined by Bernard Fenord and Pastor Willis and Apostle Chambers in absentia. And we do hope his procedure went well and he's recovering well. So our project is located in the Coconut Grove neighborhood of Miami, Florida. And our group is Grove Prosperity Partners. That is the entity, the church, and us as the developer, and who joined together to do this project. And in this image, you'll see above the existing condition, which includes an existing building that functions as the church today and a vacant lot to the left, which is also housing some temporary activities. And in the bottom, you will see an image of the proposed project, which continues to anchor retail on Grand Avenue, activating retail on Grand Avenue, and providing for residences above in a 5-story building. And there is another building that you don't see in this image to the rear. It's a 2-story multi-purpose and religious building. Next page, please. So there's a little map up in the right-hand corner of this image that shows you Coconut Grove. Coconut Grove is one of the oldest settlements in Miami. Has quite a long history, and the area of our project is in West Grove. You'll see on the map it's called West Grove, and has recently been named, if you will, as Little Bahamas, which is a nod to the history of Bahamian settlers in the late 1800s, early 1900s in this particular area of Coconut Grove. This area of the Grove has experienced tremendous growth and value appreciation, particularly over the last decade. And our project offers affordable home ownership to those who are otherwise being priced out of living in Coconut Grove. And so this project provides a foothold for families who might otherwise not be able to afford to stay within the community. This is a mixed-use affordable home ownership project, and again, the homes, the residences above are for sale for home ownership in order to build that equity and long-term stake wealth generation within this neighborhood. There are 56 units, and so we'll be welcoming 56 new homeowners into this project who will be able to build equity, and their life will be supported by neighborhood retail and by the Believers of Authority Ministries and a multi-purpose facility really anchored into the community and provide a place to strengthen connection and long-term stability within this Coconut Grove community. We're partnered with the Believers of Authority Church and ministries, and Bernard is representing the church today. And maybe, Bernard, you can speak a minute to your role within the church in addition to your role within the CEG, because in your introduction, in David Bauer's introduction of you, I think, we glazed over that. So if you don't mind speaking to that, I would love to share that as well with the audience, if that's okay.
Not a problem. So in addition to my role at the CEG, President CEO, I would say I have a similar David Bauer story as far as Pastor Willis catching me from somewhere else and pulling me in and saying, I'm going to mentor you and train you to be my successor. So I've been with CEG going on 8 years, but as it pertains to Believers of Authority, I've been a member of Believers of Authority for the past 15 years, joined when I was a young whippersnapper in college. So I'm not too much older than that, but I joined about 15 years ago. And I'm currently a minister here as well, and the adjutant to point. Been privileged to be able to work both roles and anchored by two very great mentors and those who have visionary approaches as part of the community.
Awesome. Thank you, Bernard. So this is a partnership with the Believers of Authority Ministries, and they serve as a mission-based anchor to this project and already within this community. And so that helps us honor the local roots of this project and also in our goal of deepening the positive impact in this project as we move forward with it. with its realization. We, as part of the project, we acquired this adjacent vacant parcel that I referenced in the prior slide, and that was acquired to expand the project footprint and enable the additional the vibrant retail and the ability to build the units, the residences, the affordable home ownership residences above. Next slide, please. You'll see to the right a little axonometric, a three-dimensional model of the project, and you can see how the 5-story building anchors Grand Avenue, which is a highly trafficked corridor going into Coconut Grove. And on the ground floor, we have about 2,900, about 3,000 square feet of retail, including a footprint for the Believers of Authority Church. And above, we have 56 affordable homes, which will be up to 80% AMI. I should not assume that the entire audience knows AMI, but that's average median income level. In Miami-Dade County, the average median income level is about $87,000, so it's below that. There's also a 2-story multipurpose religious building that you see in the rear, indicated in blue, and fronting Florida Avenue, which will incorporate uses dedicated to the church and other things for the community. One of the things that we have focused on in this project is responding to the fact that median home prices in Miami-Dade County have increased more than 64% over the past 5 years. That is a huge increase. And for those of you who are not from Miami-Dade County, but maybe reading about what's happening in Miami-Dade County, there's been significant appreciation of values and attraction to this market for others coming in to invest in this market. So that's really tightened the affordability. And again, it goes back to people who want to remain in the neighborhood, who want to keep their roots within the neighborhood, but aren't otherwise able to afford it. And this gives an opportunity for them to do so. Just to illustrate this point, the median sale price in this particular zip code, which is 33133, is $1.3 million. And the reason that's happening is because surrounding this Little Bahamas West Grove neighborhood is a very affluent population. And so, again, the values are really going up. Our proposed sales prices for the project range between $315,000 and $405,000, which makes it more affordable for the families at this 80% AMI income level, or as noted here, $79,300 for a family of 2. Next slide. Our development team is comprised of myself and Bernard Fanord and Tony Prado to the right-hand side, who may be joining us via Zoom, but not necessarily pictured here. And of course, Pastor Willis and many, many others who join us in arms to execute this project. My company is Prosperity Real Estate Collective. The Collective Empowerment Group was founded and led by Pastor Willis, and now Bernard Fanord, and of course the Believers of Authority Ministries, who's our church partner and community anchor. And this is a relationship-based partnership. And I'm hopeful that Pastor Willis, you'll speak to that, and Bernard, you'll speak to that, because this relationship was formed much prior to my involvement, over years of conversations between Apostle Chambers and the Collective Empowerment Group. And Prospera, brings the development expertise and the track record and our commitment to community-based anchored development. Next slide, please. So here's a little bit more about the project design. The context really drives the design. The project is positioned along that highly trafficked corridor called Grand Avenue, and it's at the convergence of 2 major transit corridors. So we're on a bus corridor, a bus transit corridor, and then we're less than a quarter mile away, or a 10-minute walk, which I've walked myself and verified, to the Metro Rail station, which is our transit transit corridor in Miami-Dade County. So one of the big things that facilitates the affordability issue here is that we have walkability and we don't have to build an abundance of parking within the project. and that provides accessibility also to the core of Coconut Grove and other goods and services within the area and along US 1. The residences are intentionally designed to be efficient, to be a smaller footprint, so we can maximize the livability and maintain long-term affordability. This is really key to the approach here in this project. The other thing that's really important is the retail activation along Grand Avenue. In fact, Apostle Chambers and Bernard and Tony Prado and I had a great discussion yesterday about how we can maintain this vibrancy along Grand Avenue as we proceed into the planning of this project and the realization of this project. And it's really important to all of us. But we're going to be, doing our best to ensure that we can support that vibrant streetscape, the neighborhood, and the overall success of the project and how it permeates and supports the bigger community of Coconut Grove and the West Grove Little Bahamas. Here is a little high level on the project financials. One of the key sources of funding for us was securing the funding from the City of Miami Forever Bonds. We were awarded $4.21 million from the City of Miami at 0% interest, and that money helps fund the project, but it also directly benefits future home buyers, and it essentially reduces their down payment, their purchase price by $75,000 each per unit. So it's really a significant source of funding for us. We also got funding from Florida Community Loan Fund. We have developer equity and a senior construction loan, which we will be securing in an estimated amount of approximately 2.9, almost $13 million. So our total development costs are about $21 million, land costs at 2.85, hard costs at 12.2, soft costs at 3.8 million, and some financing costs at 2.1 million. The units, again, are restricted to households earning up to 80% AMI, and that was a condition of the funding from the City of Miami. To the right-hand side, you see some pictures at the top. It's a gallery and across the street from our project called the Array Gallery, and there's an artist and founder is on the right-hand side. Her name is Anai Fonte, and I got to meet her when I was doing my community immersion time in Coconut Grove. And to the left of her is a woman named Denise Wallace, whose family is invested in the community and has been a longtime resident of the community. They're also in the midst of renovating an historically Black theater called the Ace Theater. And so we're working alongside her and helping her get the additional funding for that project because the vibrancy of that project is great for our project too. To the lower level, you'll see the Metro Rail line and the transit center, which is just 10 minutes away from our project. And the indication of the words of the underline, which is this this ground level park in Miami-Dade that facilitates biking and running and walking, and it's a huge asset to our community. Much of it has been put in place and the rest of it's under construction. Next slide, please. The status of our project is that our feasibility and zoning are complete. We went through our environmental review process, pretty extensive actually. We did 2 phase 1 environmental studies and another phase 2. We worked closely with zoning council to verify the zoning alongside the city and received a zoning verification letter from the city, which was really key for this project because the zoning was a little nuanced in applying sort of 3 sections of the code. We've done our feasibility design studies, our infrastructure review with the civil engineer, assessing the water, sewer, and power capacities within the neighborhood, and have been holding community stakeholder meetings, which really Bernard has been at the helm of, and I'll let him speak to that. Our initial funding stage is complete. We closed on the funding with the City of Miami bonds. Forever Bonds program, we closed on funding with Florida Community Loan Fund for our pre-development loan. And now we are in the midst of our design and entitlement phase, finalizing our site plan approval package in consultation and collaboration with our architects and engineers. And so we're advancing that work, and then the permitting and construction loan and construction will be next. Next slide, please. So again, next, completing the entitlements, commencing our building permits, securing construction financing, completing construction, and then of course our sales to our future home buyers and the leasing of the retail on the ground floor of Grand Avenue. And I wanted to note this quote, which I think is really important to this work. Because, as Nelson Mandela said, vision without action is just a dream. Action without vision just passes time, and vision with action can change the world. I really, truly believe these projects must combine vision with action, and I think that's where partnerships like these are really exciting and bring great potential and bring great execution and success to our work. I think that's it.
That's great, Ellen. Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. You've taken the time to put together, you and the team, these slides and sharing the story. We will now be joined by a couple of co-moderators for this conversation with the South Florida team. Patrick Jordan is back to join as a co-moderator, and we're bringing in the VIPs now. We're also joined by my colleague Tim Block. Tim is a senior director with Enterprise's Southeast office, and I want to say that Tim has inspired me over the years by his dedication and attention to detail with the Enterprise FBDI work in the Southeast market. Our program's growth, Enterprise's program growth with FBDI across several states, is in no small part due to the great work of Tim Block. So Tim, thanks for joining Patrick and I as co-moderators here today. And I think I'm turning it over to you with the first question, sir.
Thank you, David, and thank you for those kind words. Truly appreciate it. I am going to try really, really hard to act like I have not been engaged with this project and with these fine people for at least 3 years, and just try to be a neutral moderator and just ask neutral questions that I think the audience will benefit from. So my first question, and you kind of touched on it a little bit, Ellen, when you kind of gave the project vision, but can you give us a little bit more detail about how the project vision and the project plan was developed, specifically speaking to how you engaged the congregation, maybe Bernard and the community surrounding community, how you engaged them in the process for coming up with the project plan and mission.
Thank you, Tim. And we also appreciate your dedication to this work. You are omnipresent in these discussions and geographically as well. So thank you for your dedication. We'll continue to pretend that we haven't seen you around, but we thank you. So I'm going to start this, and then I'm going to pass it right over to Bernard. Really, my involvement came in later in the process, once the vision had already been established by Apostle Chambers and had been, worked on with Bernard and Pastor Willis and others. And so I think Prospera's my role was really kind of bringing it together and bringing feasibility to it and doing the new technical side of things, and of course bringing the expertise and experience of doing this work. So I really want to take it right over to Bernard from there, because he was really at the helm of the community work alongside Pastor or Apostle Chambers, and it's Apostle Chambers who had the original vision. So Bernard.
Thank you. So specifically to that question, Tim, I'd be remiss if I did not bring about the vision of the ministry itself, which specifically in the vision says not only to bring individuals to Christ, but to assist men and women of God to come to a place of completion. In that context, it's feeding people spiritually, but then also having their needs met naturally so that they can become a vital part of the community and society. So when you start not just feeding people spiritually, but helping them satisfy their needs, one of those needs is housing. And so it was a no-brainer as it pertains to, Apostle Chambers talks a lot about the threefold triangle of education, employment, and housing, and how those three very much intertwine with each other. It relates to, people want to have housing, but if they don't have the employment to sustain the housing, then they can't get the housing, but sometimes they can't get the employment without getting the education. So even on that front, right, the ministry started this placement service to help people get jobs. All of that ties into helping people come to a place of completeness. And so that vision has really been the driving force behind a lot of the work that the ministry has done. It also does not hurt that he's also the president of the Ministerial Alliance here. And so we have an opportunity to really hear from the community on a weekly, monthly, bi-weekly basis as far as what's going on in the community, the issues that we're facing, right? We've been at the table trying to negotiate community benefits agreements with other developers. So we had a bird's eye view, really at the table rather. And I'll use Pastor Willis's quote, if you're not at the table, you're on the menu, relative to a lot of the stuff that we were facing in West Coconut Grove. So by the time the opportunity presented itself to do this type of project, we knew what the needs were. We knew what the cry from the community was. And no, we're not going to solve it all with one fell swoop, but we can at least put a small dent in what's happening in our community. And for example, there'll probably be over 1,000 units of housing that come within a mile radius of our church over the next 5 to 7 years. And so out of all of these housing units that are coming on, we're probably one of two that are actually talking about home ownership and equity, right? One of the bigger issues that we've faced here has been housing component on the rental side. Rents go up over a course of time, whether it's every 2 years, every 3 years, every 5 years. And so you don't allow for these stakeholders to really cement themselves in the community. And as a result, home ownership is being one of the ways that we can do that, where hey, I'm an owner here, I'm planted here for the next however many years I can get with that, and also pass this on to family members. So, but all of that is the vision from Man of God as it relates to how do we help people. And he's a Grovite himself, born and raised here. And so it's especially dear to him as far as seeing the dynamics change. And Coconut Grove is a home ownership community, right? And so we're just really trying to bring the culture of home ownership back to the community from past decades. I'll pause there as far as you ask. Go ahead.
I was going to say, but was it hard to bring the congregation along with the vision, or was Apostle Chambers able to set that tone for what it is? The community, I understand, but as far as the congregation, was it a struggle there, or did they just buy into it?
Not at all. We've been intentional even in our messages and his messages as he ministers to reemphasize the vision constantly, right? To reemphasize the vision constantly. I think the quote that was alluded to by Nelson Mandela speaks specifically to the type of work that we do in ministry, which is we can talk, but there has to be tangible activity that correlates with the vision, that correlates with the goals and aspirations. After God speaks, he expects an operation to be executed after he's given instructions, right? So here's the thing, he says, delayed obedience is still disobedience in the eyes of God. So better to obey upfront than to try to wait and say, well, we'll figure out what we're going to do. But getting the congregation to support, not at all, because we're constantly talking about the vision and letting them know, hey, listen, everything you're hearing in the messages on every Sunday or every Bible study or midweek service is to be implemented in your everyday living and in the community. All we're doing is getting fat like sheep. At some point, the sheep have to get sheared so that wool can be created. And so that's really all it was. But the ministry for the last however many years has been fully supportive with the goals and the vision of the Man of God and the community as a whole.
I want to ask a follow-up, dig down a little bit more on the home ownership, Patrick, before we move to the internal team building, which is, Minister Bernard, you wear a couple of hats in this conversation, right? With the CEG, Collective Empowerment Group, as well as at the church, this particular congregation. Maybe ask you and Joaquin to tag team a little bit about that approach to wealth building through ownership, right? And the notion of making that decision and how the CEG is working with congregations to think about that as an option. For many houses of worship, they're thinking about rental. They want to maintain ownership of the land over long term. So kind of rental becomes a default. And we always, there's a need for affordable rental. But we see more and more congregations thinking about home ownership and wealth building. Maybe if you all could take a moment to talk about your point of view as it relates to encouraging congregations, this one specifically, but others, to think about home ownership. And I'm going to link that, Ellen, to you also as a question about, and then what impact does that have in terms of the approach to financing, right? Ownership versus rental. So maybe Minister Bernard and Joaquin start with you all and land the plane with Ellen talking about the impact that has on the financing approach.
Pastor, you want to go first, or you want to have me go first?
I'll follow you.
Okay. So as far as how we've looked at it in terms of housing, well, I'll backtrack it like this. My role here, similar to CEG, evolved over time. I think I just came as a young college student, looking to find a spiritual home, looking to be mentored, looking to grow in my aspirations, and recognizing that I'm a very big fan of Dr. Miles Monroe. For those that don't know him, who passed away some years ago, but he's big on kingdom, right? Not so much about denomination and religion, but he's big on kingdom. And my understanding of that began to be about, if we're going to do kingdom, then it's not just about rental. If we're going to do kingdom, it's not just about coming to church and feeling good and getting a shout and getting a hoop. And nothing wrong with that, as long as you open the words, nothing wrong with that. But there has to be, what is the kingdom? What Jesus' first thing was, seek ye first God, right? Repent, for the kingdom was at hand. So he wasn't coming necessarily to be comfortable in a religious construct. He was saying, hey, if we're going to do kingdom, there are territories and dominions and aspirations that we have to look into. So from that standpoint, when I was introduced to CEG by actually a member of the SBA, Althea Harris, who's over the region down here, she's like, well, come to an organization that is talking about, wealth building and wealth creation and closing the equity gap. And so at that time, I was working at the school board for one of the school board members. I thought I was going to have a political career and eventually be somebody's chief of staff or the male version of Olivia Pope or right, something along those lines. But he says, hey, man, and so we just had casual conversations about, man, I love the approach of civic engagement, the way, Martin Luther King and Floyd Flake, and you look at some of these other legendary leaders across the country over the history, how they deployed, not just employed, but deployed the work of the gospel into the community, whether it was housing, whether it was education, whether it was healthcare, right? So, all of these different dynamics, business creation, all of these different things. And so it just happened to be a perfect synergy between what Pastor Willis was doing with the CEG when I first came on board and what was happening at Believers of the Lord Ministries in terms of what Apostle Chambers was preaching and teaching, encouraging us to do. And he's big on, again, applying the word of God and making it everyday living. And so with that synergy, I think just over time, it was just a natural progression of got more involved with the ministry and I saw the vision and it began to be life to me, right? It just, the vision grew legs and walked. And I said, okay, well, how do we do this? And so CEG, well, what is CEG doing and how can we duplicate that or how can we bring what CEG is doing to Believers of Authority Ministries? And so I wasn't thinking about necessarily being at the helm of CEG. It just kind of worked out that way. But he gave his blessing to Pastor Willis and say, hey, if you need him, use him, do what you got to do with him. He's been trained enough to be able to duplicate what he's learned here to now apply it there. And I think my goal, even in this capacity, is how do I encourage other pastors to mentor their young Joshuas and Calebs that they can now deploy out into the community to do the work? Because a lot of pastors, and I think Bishop Macklin talked about it, there's a fear a lot of times of what development will look like, right? Or how do we navigate this arena that we're not sure of? We're comfortable behind the scriptures, right? We're comfortable with the preaching, but a lot of times going beyond the walls is a very uncomfortable. And he said it very succinctly. If you're trying to be comfortable, this will not necessarily move fast for you at all. But there has to be a level of willingness to say, hey, you know what? I trust God and I trust the people that he's connecting us to.
That's
so
good.
with that processing, and Pastor Wiz would always say, deals will move at the speed of trust. And so as we've learned to move at the speed of trust, things have been able to coalesce themselves together. So I think I call myself the brainchild of Pastor Willis and Apostle Chambers and Tony Prado, who's our director. I thought I saw his name online, but just being able to understand the spiritual, but also the community and the individual ministry, the community aspiration as well, and how that brings about the goal. But more importantly, to the other,
Minister Bernard, let me just jump in real quick to make a quick just transition on the picking up where you just were around that vision, Joaquin. Minister Bernard was talking about the vision you and CEG had around ownership and around wealth building. And if you would say something, Joaquin, more about that approach and why home ownership has been such an important modality for CEG with the work it's doing with believers, but also other congregations down there.
Well, thank you, David. And I want to say thank you, Ellen and Bernard. You all have been great spokespeople, so I can't add a whole lot, but I do have to add the background of this, as David already knows. Growing up in the South and being tutored by, funny, all the names he called, and now to add Reverend Lowry, Martin Luther King, the book that King wrote that really moved me was Where Do We Go From Here? Chaos or Community. And I was in my 20s when I started to think, well, we got to do this. In fact, David and I met, I was in my 20s, he was in his young boy age, and we would have these conversations, but we didn't have any property. Wealth building became critical. We felt very strongly that the collective banking group at the time had to attack the redlining and the predatory banking behavior. And as we attacked that, we began to see that we needed to move into a more collective empowerment model, which would be building and banking and looking at buying so that we can begin to see the economic impact move forward, as Dr. King outlined, oddly enough, at the end of his life. And I think where we are now, and I'm so pleased to see that, I can't count, and scripture says I shouldn't count the number of churches now who are partnering with us, who have land, who have caught the vision. And I would just say, David, the key ingredient that I think that I brought to the table, that's why I'm so excited to be president emeritus and founder now, because if you don't successfully lead in a way that builds transition to the next generation, you just been out for a walk. Nothing is really happening. And Bernard and Tony and I have been talking about this, and Tony happened to stumble into Ellen in a University of Miami setting. And he saw immediately how we wanted to work. We wanted to be diverse. We wanted to look at who these builders and developers are. We're excited now that we have a number of developers of all races and sizes and makeup trying to help these churches based on where they are. And my final word before I let you all take this back over is that, as Bernard just referenced, I believe these things move at the speed of trust. So my job has been to build the trust among the clergy. In this particular case, Apostle Chambers had a good vision. I preached one Sunday for him, saw the land next door to a building and said, hey, we need to get that. And he said, we've been talking about it. I said, well, let's see what we can do to get that land. And as we began to walk and talk, of course, our trust grew in each other. And the whispering to the congregation became very easy because now we're building a consensus. It's truly a movement. And I'm excited to see that Bernard has unfortunately had to wear 3 hats, not just 2, David. The CEG hat, as well as he's being trained to be a developer under Ellen now, but he's also a real estate agent, so that he's been able to help us in our infill lot development. And Tim, I want to thank you for that, because Bishop, you need to know that our little bit of cash to help some of these churches comes from taking 1 or 2 lots that the city basically gave us at a discount, build houses, put people in them, and each person who buys is going in with about $150,000 in equity. So we're not selling at the highest price to begin with. So we're beginning to see this whole economic movement take some shape here in South Florida. The mayor's been very supportive. We're waiting to see if we're going to get some more support around some other issues, but we'll hold off on that. So, David, I hope I've begun to answer those questions.
And
Appreciate
David,
that walk. Yeah, go ahead.
One quick final point you mentioned as far as the trusting dynamic, as far as this, and we'd be remiss if we didn't. One of the things that we've faced, and when you have the conversation about home ownership, it's how do we get when pastors feel like they're giving up the land, right? Because there's a conversation of stewardship on the ministry side, right? Well, if God gave us this land, how can we give it up? Or so even into Tony's credit and Ellen's credit, big conversations about how do we create ground leases where the church can still own the land on home ownership, or some level of land trust, or some type of mechanism created where still getting the best of worlds. You can still retain the ownership, but you're still providing sustainability for the ministry and keeping the land. But a lot of it has always come down to how do we steward the asset that God has given us? How do we move forward, providing that resource to the community? But as Pastor Willis alluded, once they get that understanding, and to credit to Enterprise's technical program, because it helps, I think, soften the learning curve, or shorten the learning curve rather, as far as saying, okay, we don't know development all the way, but we at least have an understanding of the basic jargon that we'll need to have a conversation with developers or whoever's coming to our table when we're having that discussion. And I think that cohort, and we've been pushing them, listen, as soon as Enterprise has it, join that cohort, because you need at least some type of level of conversation. We know that everybody's not going to be at Tony and Ellen's level of understanding of development, but at least the basic, ABCs, so that you're not feeling so afraid or feeling like a developer's coming in and taking your land and never giving it back and never providing some level of community.
Yeah, that's an important piece. And Patrick, I promise going to go to you next to the question. But Ellen, one quick thing I wanted to ask you to speak to quickly, if you could, for a moment, is when a house of worship is going with a home ownership approach, and I appreciate, Minister Bernard, you mentioned that ground leases or land trust, various approaches that congregations can take. Ellen, as a developer, what does that do in terms of the approach to financing? Does it change any of the kind of fundamentals? Hey, we're doing ownership instead of rental. Does it make it easier, harder, or just different for you from the development standpoint?
I would say generally different. And so what we have found ourselves doing is explaining the differences, right? We're not going to make the decision, on our own. We're going to make it together. But what we're going to do is outline the considerations, right? If it's for home ownership, then it's one thing. If it's for rental, then it's another thing. And definitely the capital stack looks different for each of those. And then the ground lease consideration is a whole other thing. And not every financial institution likes ground leases. So then all of a sudden you have to look at certain ones that are interested in it and conducive for that. So there are multiple considerations when we're looking at the different structures that do affect financing. I would say in the case of this project and securing the funding from the city of Miami, it was a material differentiator that we were delivering affordable home ownership. And I think Bernard will probably agree with me, right? Which is like that the earmark of funds that the commissioner had in our district, in the city, from the city of Miami, was coupled, to attach to a program to deliver this 80% AMI ceiling of home ownership. So it was a positive for us, right? Because it sort of matched up the vision of delivering home ownership, providing for wealth building in this community, and then, finding the funding that was within the community already, so it was a differentiator for us in this project.
Thank you. Patrick. Thanks.
Thank you. Wanted to ask Minister Bernard, with what you and Pastor Willis were talking about regarding mentorship and helping folks kind of come up through understanding and learning the process and grow. What was the approach that you and Apostle Chambers took in kind of building your internal team kind of within the church? And we heard from Bishop Macklin about examining hearts. How did you identify kind of who you wanted to involve within the project, and kind of what, if any, roles are they playing as you kind of move through?
Well, I don't want to duplicate, but very similar to that. And I had no say so in terms of the team or anything like that. Pastor Chambers really, and is very something similar to Bishop Macklin, which is you examine the hearts, right? Who's captured the vision, right? Sometimes, he has a statement that says, sometimes revelation is not taught, it's caught. Right? Some things you just can't teach. You just know when somebody's got it, right? So I would say I don't know how many people have come through Pastor Willis's tutorship over the years, where he said David is it, right? Or David has the it factor to do that or to be over. And so I think it was the same thing with Apostle Chambers. I don't think it was necessarily like he had a specific thing. I think it was more of a gradual progression of time and saying, okay, who's really gravitating to the vision? Who's looking to see it and manifest it and bring it to pass, right? Who's looking to build the legacy of the ministry? And I think it was the same thing with CE. I'm sure many pastors and clergy have come through years and things like that. It was probably a pricking of his heart by the Lord to say, Pastor Jackson Jr. should be the next chair of the board, right? So that's not really something that you can calculate specifically. So I don't think Apostle really had a particular algorithm that he used to do that. So whether myself, Prophet Travis Rainey, Minister Green, Evangelist Jones, so a lot of them, were members of the vision for quite some time. So they had an understanding already of what the long-term goal were for the ministry. And then with that, it's just, again, the gradual progression of time. He's big on patience, so he's never been in a rush to try to get anything done. He really believes patience being a virtue. And his thing is, if you can't master patience, you'll never master obeying God. And in that patience process, I think he was patient with who's coming through the ministry over the years, and then carefully selecting who those individuals were with that. And so, and there probably maybe more people that come up down the line that will join the ministry. And, I don't want to be a preacher in the moment, but, there was an example in the scripture where there was a guy who had some workers. Some came at the first hour and some came at the last hour, but the people that came at the last hour still got paid the same amount as those that came at the first hour. And some of the people got upset will say, well, how come they got paid? Well, what I paid them has nothing to do. I still paid you the wages that I agreed to you. So I think you can kind of apply that to vision. It may not be so much about when they come. It's just a matter of how effectively they capture it during the time frame that they are there. So, our membership is not big. We're the Church of Philadelphia, where you can have a small number, but you can do great and mighty works. And so the few folks that we have at the table, I think all of us, I might be the youngest in terms of membership to the ministry. I've been here about going on 16. Travis has been here about 20. Minister Green's been here about 28, 29. Evangelist Jones been about 25. So I'm the baby of the group, honestly, when it comes to the team. But I would probably say that's the best way for me to answer that in terms of the legacy and the sustainability of team planning.
Yeah, thank you. We often see folks who are thinking about it as a house of worship, thinking about development, put out an RFP. We also see folks who know who they want to work with because they've been working kind of in relationship. It has seemed like you guys have identified each other kind of and decided relationally we want to work together.
Right.
What maybe you and Ellen, Minister Bernard, could talk just for a minute about what it's been like to build trust and to build that relationship.
So I know Tony's not on the panel, but Tony, he has this thing saying, I like to trust my gut. He's a solid 82-year-old, but if he talks, you will not think he's 82. But he'll say, I trust my gut. And I think he had a Mary and Elizabeth moment when he met Ellen and the baby and probably skipped the beat. And he was like, I think this is the lady we need to work with. And they fostered that, and he brought her to the table to us. Well, initially the pastor at the time he was the president. So had the conversation with them, and they organically grew and worked together. And then as I came on board with that, and we had organically started to communicate and do that. So everything of this process has really just been an organic cohesion of conversation and communication, and just saying, hey, this is your expertise, this is your expertise, this is your expertise. Everybody brings to the table, and it's just been able to work that way. I saw Pastor Willis's hand up, so I'll yield.
And let me say, Patrick, that's a great question. I want to amplify that a bit to answer that comment that Bernard said jokingly. I know that over 1,300 young people have gone through Seed to Harvest leadership training, David being one of the first. And one of the things that I tried to identify immediately, and I did it with Bernard, and I kind of sensed it with Ellen too, is, are you clear on your purpose? If I can tell a young person is clear on their purpose, and then I know, okay, I can work with them, then I don't have to really micromanage them because they know where God is calling them to go. But at the same time, I think this trust element is not to be taken lightly, because you're building trust not just between the clergy, and we have a tremendous number of leaders. We've referenced our new chairman, who is now pastoring a church, Alfonso Jackson Jr. His father built up a massive ministry down south. And I knew, because the apple doesn't fall too far from the tree, that he got it from his daddy. And his daddy turned him over to me and said, look, you work with him. He has a lot of respect. So I think these are some of the elements that really go into making this a success. And people begin to relax, be patient, and breathe. There's a lot more I could say. I'm kind of joking with you guys a little bit. I'm changing my background because I'm at the beach and I'm relaxed because I've turned everything over to some capable leaders, and if they need me, they know where I am. I'm probably at the beach.
That's good. Tim, you want to pick up?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Pastor Willis, you mentioned earlier that you walked the neighborhood with Apostle Chambers, and you all identified a site that would be critical to the project. And I know firsthand that it was. Can you speak a little bit more, Ellen, Bernard, about how critical that piece of property was, and actually how you acquired it? I know there were several attempts to acquire it and finance it. If you could kind of speak to, how that helped move the project where it is now.
I'll jump in, and I want to add to what Bernard and Pastor Willis were saying about coming together and working together. And I think what brings us all together is a shared purpose at the end of the day. And finding that alignment and having that purpose is what is really key to our success together. And I come from a background of a lot of development experience, on large scale institutional levels. And I came to a point within my career where I was like, I got to do more of this work, but with more purpose. And so doing these projects, with Believers of Authority Ministries, with other churches, Faith Community Baptist Church, and many others, it brings that purpose to the forefront, and it just makes the work that much more fulfilling. So, in terms of the adjacent parcel, it expanded the footprint of the project on Grand Avenue, which I noted earlier in the conversation is a highly trafficked corridor, is a corridor of greater of significance, traveling in and out of Coconut Grove, and it literally expanded the size of the project and enabled us to do and deliver the scale of impact which we can. And we still just have 56 units. It's really not a monster-sized project, but that vacant parcel was really key to us being able to put together a project of this size and scope and impact. And in terms of the history of getting it under contract, I'll let Bernard speak to that, because it was in and out, and the seller of the parcel is a long time Coconut Grove family who has owned land within Coconut Grove in this area of the West Grove for a very long time, who at some point acquired this parcel. And anyway, I'll let Bernard talk to that piece.
So first of all, yes, the site being acquired was absolutely paramount and tantamount to us being able to develop at the density and the capacity that we are developing currently. When Pastor Willis came to the church and made that comment, we just looked at each other and said, okay, so that's just another person confirming what we've been talking about. Even the current parcel of land that the church owned was a testament to, and I'm sure Ellen has heard this story before, God told him to get the property back in 1995, but it took however long for whatever reason, I wish he was here to kind of really break it down, but it took time basically from 1995 to 2013 before we acquired this particular site. His vision had always been to minister in Coconut Grove. That was what God gave him, and that was what he was doing. And so, site one, the site adjacent to, we had conversations with the previous two commissioners about using certain allocations of funding to help acquire, to try to look at different partners and collaborators to see what we could do to properties, and all of them fell through. Obviously, as you know, when you're working with politicians or really trying to establish PPPs or public-private partnerships, it's moving based on, what their agenda is sometimes and whether or not they're going to be in office at the end of that year. And so we had been, fortunately for us, the same chief of staff has been the chief of staff for the last three commissioners. And so he had a very good understanding of what we were trying to do, projects. So he had a little bit of time to be able to vet and look at the details of the funding sources and whether or not we could make it work. And so once we began to really start pitching ownership, I think it allowed for a variation of the mechanism to be that. But yeah, we absolutely wouldn't have been able to do that without acquiring the land. And also kudos to Ellen's point, the seller of the property, whose family has been in the Grove for almost 100 years, right? And they had to be willing to be patient with us and understand that the process is going to take time. If you're working with the city, city bureaucratic processes, they have their ebbs and flows, they have their timelines, and they had to be willing to trust us and say, hey, we're willing to, as long as you keep us informed, as long as you keep us at the table, in terms of what's happening, and we don't feel like we're being dragged along, we're going to walk with you to the closing period. And thankfully he did, and we were able to get to that point. But absolutely, the right next door, we had been eyeing it since we moved in 2013, right? We had been having conversations about it, and especially in this corridor of West Grove, is historically had been known for Black ownership, because that was a parcel that was allowed for Black and brown people. The rest of the Grove was not given access to them. And so trying to champion home, Pastor Wiz used to have this thing called unapologetically banking, building, buying, unapologetically Black. I'm taking you back to way back then. So, and so we took that same approach, right? Like, how do we continue to encourage Black and brown home ownership, or Black and brown business ownership, and small business support, or health clinics and things like that. And so purchasing the land was all in that vein of what he wanted to do in terms of a systems integration approach to bringing the community together.
Absolutely. So thank you for that, Bernard. So we have about 3 minutes left. I think we got a couple of questions. So if we can be kind of succinct in answering these last couple of questions. The first one is for you, Ellen, around, you walked us through the capital stack, and there was the developer equity component on there. Can you kind of unpack that a little bit and, tell us how that's structured and how that's coming into the deal?
Yeah, the developer equity is largely land equity, plus any additional equity we'll need to secure the additional financing sources.
Outstanding.
Right.
I think that was it for my question.
Yeah, that's great. I think,
Do I got the next one? Oh, roadblocks,
yeah.
challenges and roadblocks. If you want to hit any of those, I know there's been plenty, but maybe the top one or two.
I would say that let's go back to that patience point because, the city of Miami, $4.2 million was really key to the capital stack of this project and our ability to acquire that adjacent parcel. And so we had to put together a very robust submission to the city, application to the committee. We had to go through that process with the city. We had to go to multiple public hearings, and Bernard was really on the ground with the community, making sure that the communication was happening with the local groups, the Mysterious Alliance, the many other groups that he has longstanding relationships with, and we had support. We really had great support from the commissioner and from the board, who approved us, but patience, right? That one roadblock was patience. We did have patience with the funding, I would say, is one of the biggest ones. And then we had some zoning issues that we had to work through and just get clarity on, which was really important for us. And I'm sure we'll have more coming forward, because we're in the entitlements phase, design phase right now, and we've got to get through all of that, and then we've got to get ourselves ready with construction pricing and construction financing. So stay tuned.
Ellen, thanks for that. And I'm going to flex just in the spirit of time. Minister Bernard and Pastor Joaquin, give you all the last word. I'm going to ask each of you all if you can take about 25 seconds and answer this question. To any congregation, denominational entity that's listening in and may want to get involved in doing faith-based development, or any public or private sector entity who may be able to provide support for those kind of efforts, what would be your one word, kind of your phrase of encouragement, thing to think about for those who may want to leave this conversation saying, what can I do? What should I do? How can I do? Whether it's the faith community or non-faith community to support this kind of work. So we actually each take about 25 seconds on that. Minister Bernard, you'll go, and Joaquin, you'll stick the landing for us.
I would simply say to the houses of worship, scripture says, occupy until I come, right? And I take that as the charge for us as houses of worship to be intentional with what God has given us, occupy our communities, not just as moral leaders, but as leaders in the business sector. And I think we're seeing a phase in which the houses of worship and our faith leaders are delving into other arenas that I think are critical for being pillars of the community and really just houses of worship making an impact in terms of the development and not having to depend so much on government, but depending on the assets that God has already given you. So I would just simply encourage them, use what's in your hand, right? The rod that Moses had already had in his hand, use what's in your hand and occupy the communities and the areas that God has given you to make a great impact.
Thank you, Minister Bernard. Appreciate that. Joaquin?
In one word, and we've said it a lot today, trust. You got to trust God, trust those God puts in your path and in your hand resources, and then be able to build an atmosphere of trust among each other. I have to say, when we started the CEG, David, the biggest issue, and I shared with all the pastors who initially came trying to get money to build churches. And we helped quite a few churches get millions of dollars of loans to build churches. And after they got what they needed, they were gone. But I had told them from the very beginning that what we are having to do here is we've got to learn how to trust each other and work toward a common goal. And I totally resonate with what Bernard said. And you know this, David. I've never pastored a church beyond 300 and some members. But what I've always said in every ministry, while we may have a mini church, we have a mega ministry. And God has used us like he used Gideon. And then sometimes you just have too many people and they get in the way and create all kinds of distrust. So work within your realm. And that would be my word. In a word, trust God, trust one another, and trust your future.
Great. Many thanks to Minister Bernard, to Ellen, and to Joaquin Willis here for your work, for the conversation, the insights you share with us. We really appreciate the time. Again, prayers for healing for Apostle Chambers. So thank you all so much. Tim and Patrick, really grateful to you guys for jumping in here to be part of the conversation as well. So God bless you all. Thank you for that. We'll transition now to our final panel. We're excited about this one because it's going to feature a discussion from two people that are in the faith-based development ecosystem in ways that gives them some perspectives on what is happening nationally. So grateful to be joined by Madeline Johnson. Maddie is the program director for the Church Properties Initiative at the Fitzgerald Institute for Real Estate at the University of Notre Dame. Maddie is a key national voice in the world of research and analysis of efforts related to faith-based development. And Reverend Dr. Sidney Williams is the president and CEO of Crossing Capital Group and the Oikos Institute. Sidney brings an impressive combination of experience as an investment banker, a pastor, an author, and practitioner who is leading efforts to provide cohort experiences that assist congregations with discernment and theological reflection as they consider entering the development space. So Dr. Williams and Maddie, thank you all both so much for being with us today. It's a real pleasure to have you here with us in this conversation we've been having all day. So let's jump right in. Would like for each of you all to maybe take a moment to tell us a little about, share with the audience a little bit about the work that your respective organizations or teams are doing that intersect with the faith-based development work across the country. Maddie, why don't we start with you and then we'll go to Dr. Williams.
Sounds good. Thanks so much for the invitation, David, and it's really a pleasure to be part of this conversation. I've really enjoyed the previous panels. So as a university-based initiative, the Church Properties Initiative primarily plays a thought leadership and connecting role through research, education, and then outreach. So as an example, we work with faculty researchers like my amazing colleague, Father Pat Reedy, who's at our law school, who published an article in the Yale Law Journal last year that's already been cited in a judicial decision that allowed a church to offer emergency shelter on their property. So that's an example of our research mandate in action. On the education front, we offer both undergraduate courses and courses for professionals on the connections between theology and real estate. So here on campus, we're already starting to see top students in our real estate program who are aspiring to careers in mission-driven real estate right out of college. Reaching out into the world of practice, one of the things we do is host an annual conference, which is a place to foster collaboration and connections between researchers, faith leaders, and real estate professionals. So we've already seen some really awesome collaborations emerge just from those conversations, and we're looking forward to focusing on housing at our next event coming up in March.
Thanks, Maddie. Dr. Williams.
Yeah, I too enjoyed the last panel. It's really informative. And we started Oikos Institute because we realized, as the last panel said, just the startup process for many congregations is really difficult. And they don't have the seed capital necessary to really ferret out their ideas. So we launched the Oikos Institute to be able to fund some of that ideation and pre-development ideation before they actually know what the project is. We fund the ideation process or discernment process, hopefully getting them to a project idea that's feasible. And then also, like Maddie, we host a national conference. We just hosted our third national conference in Philadelphia to bring together practitioners, real estate developers, pastors, faith leaders. I think, Dave, you had a chance to come and do a fireside chat with the president of Nathan Cummings Foundation for people just to sort of get the idea, the spark that it is possible and to see examples of how it's working. We just secured a $5 million grant from Lilly Endowment to do a storytelling initiative to identify 25 congregations across the country that have done adaptive reuse projects. So super excited about that. And then Crossing Capital Group comes alongside of churches. Once they sort of have made up their mind they want to do a project, we then walk as an owner's rep with them through the development process. So we're working roughly about 100 churches now in the accelerator program, and then another 10 churches that are actually involved in various stages of a project.
Dr. Williams, thank you. And we're going to come back to the Lilly storytelling piece as a question around case making. But before we go there, I want to ask both you and Maddie, and maybe I'll start with you. This notion we've been talking about, the movement, right? This really has become a movement. I'm always clear with folks, faith-based development's been happening in this country for hundreds of years. So the notion of a house of worship doing development is not new. What seems to be, we're at an emerging point, is there is this growing movement of kind of an industry, professionalized industry thinking about faith-based development. And so I'd like to get you all's take on, do you actually see that from the seats that you're in? Is this really an emerging movement? If so, what do you think is contributing to that emergence? Or if you don't really see it as a movement yet, what more needs to happen to really build the movement? So, Dr. Williams, maybe we'll start with you and then go to Maddie.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think COVID had a tremendous impact on the whole commercial real estate sector in general, but more specifically, certainly around congregations. Prior to COVID, hybrid ministries online versus in person, for the larger churches, that was a thing. Now that's a requirement for most congregations to have the hybrid opportunity, which means you're seeing less and less people gather on a Sunday morning for worship, and so less need for space. There's also, I think, recognition in all sectors of religion that we're overbuilt, whether it's the Catholic Church, Lutheran Church, Presbyterian, Baptist. We've got way too many churches. Maddie, I don't know if your research has shown this, but in Morris County, where I live, a lot of the Catholic parishes were established around European immigration. So if they're Slavic, there's a Catholic church for the Slavic people. There's one for the Irish. There's one for the Italian. And now what you see is sort of a merger. People just going to the one Catholic church. And so we don't need all these little churches. Same for Baptists. If you came from Georgia, there's a Georgia church. If you came from Tennessee and North Carolina, there's a North Carolina church. And so in some neighborhoods, you may have as many as 20, 30 churches, and all of them put together probably have less than about 50 members each. And so what do you do with the space? Thirdly, I think what we're seeing is rapid gentrification or development in urban corridors, where at one point during the 60s, post the civil rights movement, we saw emptying of the cities. Now those cities are coming back, flourishing, rental rates are going up. And so it's putting downward pressure on churches. Demographics have shifted, impacts of COVID, and now the real estate value is spiked and parking is less available. And the opportunity to redevelop these properties is really, clear and pressing. So I think there are a number of external factors. Pew Research has said also there's a de-Christianing or de-religious, there are less and less people feeling they need to identify with institutional religion. That wasn't the case maybe 50 years ago in the United States. So I think those are some of the factors that are emptying the congregations. And we have this sort of supply of real estate that is well positioned strategically that needs to be developed.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. Maddie.
Yeah, I think that's really well said. And maybe another way of making a similar point is that I think this movement, what's unique about it is that it is such an acute intersection of a faith property story and a broader economic and urban development story. And, so on the faith property side, undeveloped parking lots, underused properties, closing churches, congregations reimagining how their property can serve their community. But then on the other side, and I think some of the earlier policy conversations open this up, the political and financial and even kind of material or supply chain mechanisms of housing development in this country are broken, as evidenced by the severe lack of supply. And you can tell a lot of different stories about why that is. Is it overregulation, prohibitive zoning restrictions, even prohibitive labor or environmental review, or a financialization story? There's the fact that our economy depends on rents rising and rising and land values rising and rising, as Chuck Marone, who's going to speak at our event, has argued. So that intersection opens up some new conversations, both risks and opportunities for the church and other faith-based actors. I think the risk is that I think faith-based property can be like a pressure release valve that keeps the broader society from having to fully face some of those systemic issues. But on the positive side, and as we've seen, we've seen two positive things on this call. Even the YIGBY conversations are not limited to faith-based properties. The right way of that happening is for the church to be a bellwether and kind of the tip of the spear, but to open up a broader conversation about land use reform. And it was awesome to hear ways in which that's absolutely happening. But also, as we've seen in the panelists, for the churches not to be instrumentalized as kind of means to a policy end, but actually acting as a prophetic witness to the kinds of transformation that needs to happen in the economy. So I do think this is a really interesting moment to be watching this intersection of faith and real estate.
Maddie, I want to stick with you and pick up on something that's a great kind of segue, and it goes back to something we put a marker in a minute ago about the Lilly grant. I want to start with you, Maddie. The role of case making in building the movement. How important is data in the case making? What sort of data? And how important is storytelling? And what are the key elements of a story that needs to be told to grow this movement. And I'm thinking about something that was said in the panel with Bishop Macklin and Glad Tidings Church of God in Christ, where one of the people said, Bishop's not selling anything, he's just telling a story and kind of inviting folks to come in. So when we think about the movement building, case making, storytelling, data, key elements, I want to ask both of you all to speak on that. And so Maribel, we'll start with you.
Sure. So this is something we're really interested in from a research point of view. Data is really important. We've seen that behind all of the different policy efforts. First step, just kind of quantifying and locating faith stewarded property, both in a particular metro area and how it might be concentrated in, as Dr. Williams said, in areas that might be specifically gentrifying or under development pressure, as well as broadly across states. So our initiative has participated in some of those studies to try to quantify and make the policy case that changing development regulations on faith-based property, it has the potential to make a big impact. But data alone, as much as we love that as researchers, isn't the whole story. And the decisions that are made about church property are so personal. So one of the first things that we did when the Church Properties Initiative was started just a few years ago was to conduct a long-form case study of a development project that a parish in Austin, Texas undertook. And it was amazing. It's an impressive project. It provided almost 1,000 beds of student housing, about a fifth of which are affordable, on an acre of previously undeveloped land that was held by a parish, that the parish is still there and thriving. An impressive project, but we didn't do any groundbreaking analysis or anything. We just told the story. But because it was packaged in a way that another Catholic parish or a bishop could look at and see as a credible path, that was huge. So I think the key element of a story here is both making the connection to a congregation's mission. Again, on these panels, we've seen visionary leaders for whom that connection is very obvious. That's not the case for every pastor or every steward of a faith-based property. There might not be an obvious pre-existing investment in community development. So A, making the connection to mission, and then B, showcasing the necessary partnerships with outside, often secular organizations or market-based developers, and showing how those can be positive and avoid some of the pitfalls that might be in people's minds. I think is both of those elements of storytelling are key.
That's great. Thanks, Maddie. Dr. Williams?
Yeah, it's funny. There is a tension, I think. I serve on the board of the Adrian Dominican Sisters and just got asked to serve on the board of a Catholic university. Some of the sisters, their finance committees are looking at this as a return on investment decision, which is interesting because you would think the Catholic social teaching would dominate the real estate decision. And you see it in the Presbyterian Church where people are thinking we need to get the best price because that's the right stewardship model, as opposed to what's the purpose of this real estate and how do we fulfill mission. And so I think part of hopefully the work that Maddie's group is doing and the work that others are doing, we can really lift this up as a conversation because there are a number of finance people on these boards who think, selling to the highest and best use and getting the most profit is the right approach to sustain the congregations versus, hey, maybe we should use this for naturally occurring affordable housing. Or maybe it's a visited church in Galveston, Texas. They took the whole Sunday school wing and turned it into a health clinic and partnered with a hospital. And the hospital now pays them $5 million a year to operate a health clinic for the unhoused and the undocumented. And it saves the hospital roughly $200 million a year by having this partnership. So I think churches have to really kind of figure out what's our mission? And is it really to sell the real estate for the highest price? Or do we keep the real estate and use it for something consistent with our mission?
And Doc, are you able to, if you're able to share a little bit, the award from Lily and some of the work you all will be doing around storytelling, talk a little more about the importance of storytelling. What's the story to tell, how to tell it, who needs to be telling, and who's the audience, that needs to get it. Say a little more about that, the importance of that as part of this movement building.
Yeah, so I think on the religious property owner side, it's embracing risk and sustaining mission, right, in new and different ways. So I think a lot of congregations, regardless of denomination, have a tendency that when the worshiping congregation declines, it's time to sell the property, right, to the marketplace. I think there are a number of foundations, municipalities who need to really see this as an opportunity for affordable housing development, for social impact, and make it easier. So I was really impressed with that last panel discussion where the city of Miami did 0% coupon bonds to make this deal happen. Like, what are the ways municipalities, philanthropy, foundations can help make this possible? If churches are willing to contribute the land, take the risk, in what ways can this be possible? And so I think the work of Enterprise and LISC and others, it makes this more palatable. Social Finance put out a report a couple of years back on the reimagining of these convents and using it for affordable housing or senior living. I think the more of those stories that we get out, people see it as a valid option rather than just simply closing the congregation or selling the property, but really an extension of mission, I think is a goal.
Maddie, I'm going to go to you on this just start with this next question, but it picks up on something Dr. Williams said, and actually a question that came through from the audience around congregations in decline. How does this square vis-a-vis, we heard on the last panel, a lot of churches maybe aren't in decline, they're just small. And then there are those who are in decline. Are there trends that you all are seeing in the faith community, either at the congregational or at the denominational level, as it relates to faith-based development work? And I'm going to say, for better or for worse, trends that are, hey, we're getting more of this, that's helping and it's building, or trends at the congregational or denominational level that are providing real challenges that need to be addressed. So Maddie, we'll start with you and then go to Dot.
So I can definitely speak best to the Catholic world, but I think the trend that I'll describe is being echoed throughout this landscape. Around the country, particularly in the Northeast, Catholic dioceses are, to exactly Dr. Williams' point about the Irish church, the Polish church, the Italian church, are looking at this overbuilt landscape and beginning to systematically try to right-size that portfolio, starting with right-sizing the church's presence from a pastoral and ministry point of view. But down the road from those exercises are massive real estate questions. And in conversations that we are in with these dioceses, one of the most promising trends that I've seen emerge is the creation of dedicated diocese-level development entities to help fix what I often call the agency problem, which is the question of whose responsibility is it to reposition an underused or now completely disused church property. So many possibilities for positive long-term community impact have fallen into the gap between an overextended clergy member and a totally secular, private, competitive real estate market. And so the creation of a couple examples, I know of one diocese in which the bishop actually mandated that all properties that are going to be divested be redeveloped into housing. That's not the only permissible reuse of a former house of worship under Catholic canon law, but the clarity that the bishop gave to his diocese allowed the diocese to create a separate corporate entity whose sole purpose is to acquire developable properties from parishes and compensate the parish for that property, and then to turn around and sell it to a vetted development partner. So that takes the pressure off of the individual congregation to navigate a complex real estate development project and allows for an economy of scale there. Another diocese created a development entity with a broader mandate to actually accompany parishes in discerning possible, a wider range of redevelopment outcomes, not just housing. Some dioceses are creating not only intermediaries like this to just hold property short term, but full scale development corporations. Of course, the Catholic Church has a long history of providing housing through Catholic Charities agencies. So it might be a partnership with an existing Catholic Charities agency, or in an area that doesn't have one of those, the creation of a new entity. So I think that kind of thinking at a regional level is a really encouraging trend.
Yeah.
Maddie, Doc?
Yeah, I think for the independent congregations that don't have the benefit of that structure, it's building coalitions like we heard earlier around the collective banking group. We're working in Philadelphia with the United Way and sort of Black-led nonprofit executives to sort of partner with faith leaders to see how can we sort of have program and property come together in the city of Philadelphia. So I think there's a lot of opportunities, but as you and I talked about, like say in Georgia and Fulton County, there are counties and municipalities that are convening this conversation and say, look, we see the assets, we see the opportunities, how do we sort of convene people together, these independent congregations to really think about deploying those assets in a way that meets the needs of the county or the city.
Appreciate that. We've got about 4 minutes left. I want to see if I can get in two questions, one of which came in, to kind of combine a couple of questions that came in actually from the audience. One is about connectional versus congregational. And Doc, you were just there for a second and maybe picking up on that a little bit. Is there any word of advice, suggestion, thought about for those who are in a connectional setting, polity versus congregational, picking up, Doc, where you were just there? And then also, are you all seeing things in the rural space? We're certainly seeing things in an urban space. Someone's asking a question, are either of you all seeing much happening in rural places and any kind of trends there? Doc, maybe we'll start with you on either or both of those questions.
Yeah, I'll start with the rural. HUD has a relatively small budget versus USDA. And I think a missed opportunity for rural congregations is USDA funding, because you do need community hubs in rural communities. You do need recreation. You do need resources. While it may not be the need for housing or density the way it is in urban areas, but there is a need. I don't know where that's coming from.
Getting a little bit of static there. Sorry about that.
Sorry. So I think the rural dynamics are a little different. I think there's possibilities around farming and those kind of things, and using space in different ways. And I've seen examples of that in some rural communities. But it's less about the density of housing, affordable housing. In some of those cases, there's trailers, double wide. So that's less of a need. But there is a need for community hubs, even in rural areas, and USDA has funding for that. Access to Wi-Fi, access to resources, where many of the families don't have access to Wi-Fi when they get back to their trailers. There could be a community hub for education, for workforce development, for access, et cetera. I think in the urban areas, I'm excited when I see mayors and municipal leaders really take the charge on this and convene and give leadership and make it easier. I know the mayor of Los Angeles has put some things in place to make it really easy for faith-based organizations to develop affordable housing and helping with the zoning and the processes like that. So I think those are helpful, but it's not going to be just faith-led. I think what we say at Oikos is we're not trying to save churches, but churches are a great vehicle to save communities.
Great point. Great point. Thank you. Maddie, any thoughts you have either on the rural context and or the connectional versus congregational polity piece?
I don't have much to add to the rural question, except that it's a vexing question. It's tough because that's another intersection of it's not only the church, it's the broader community. There's a broader drain of resources from rural areas. But absolutely agree with Dr. Williams' point about USDA. We've seen some really interesting collaborations between agricultural communities and faith-based organizations that sometimes do involve housing, because that's a piece of the vitality of ongoing, the ongoing vitality of agricultural communities. I think the difference in church polity is one of the most confusing elements of this ecosystem, because on the ground, properties may look very similar, but behind the scenes, the decision-making processes can be so different. But I think, in my experience, there is, even in a very hierarchical church like the Catholic Church, there is a huge degree of local agency. And so I think maybe I would just suggest that there's more to learn across the spectrum than some might expect. That even if there is a decision maker or a stakeholder who needs to be brought on board far away, you're never going to get away from the need for engaged visionary leadership on the ground.
Maddie, thanks for that. And I'll ask you, Maddie, to answer our last question first, and Doc, let you back clean up for us, which is similar question to what I asked the last panel at the end, which is, for the audience, we've got folks from around the country who are from all parts of the ecosystem, faith-based, public entities, private, philanthropy, developers, et cetera. Is there, from where you sit, what is your word of charge, word of encouragement to say to folks on the line? If you lean in on this, if you double down on that, if you think about bringing this brick to the wall, so to speak, it could be helpful in terms of growing the impact and effectiveness of this movement writ large. So maybe take about 20, 30 seconds for each of you all to maybe hit that. So Maddie, we'll start with you.
Sure. Well, close to my heart as an educator is the next generation. And I think I was really struck by something that Ellen said on the last panel, which is for her as a real estate developer, real estate professional, the opportunity to work on a mission-driven project was very fulfilling. And almost nothing gets me so excited as seeing a student who's, on the path to Wall Street, super sharp, super driven, who realizes that doesn't have to be in competition with faith or service, but can actually serve that. So I think growth and pathways into careers in mission-driven real estate are a really vital part of this movement actually being a source of change in the culture and in the economy.
Thanks, Maddie. Doc, she may have queued you up. She said something about Wall Street and the like. So that might have been might have tossed you a good alley-oop there, my friend.
Well, I do enjoy my path on Wall Street, but I'm going to offer up a quote from Malcolm X. Malcolm X said, "There's never been a revolution in the history of mankind that did not involve real estate." And so I think there's a revolutionary opportunity in our cities where we've owned properties for more than a century. And to abandon those properties or sell them for less than their market value for someone to take and erase the history of a people would be a sad thing. And so I know the church I pastor, it's been here 182 years. The woman that started that church, her mother had been enslaved here in Morris County, New Jersey, but she had the wisdom and foresight to put her money together and buy a piece of property. And we're still 182 years later. To sell that to a developer and erase that history would be a tragedy, a moral tragedy. And so what gets me excited about this work is the moral imperative of not allowing these properties to be sold to, market rate developers who erase the history of a people. And there's just too many examples of that. And we got to hold on to that.
Dr. Williams, thank you. Powerful word to end on for this panel. I want to thank Dr. Sidney Williams and Madeline Johnson for being with us here to give us our closing panel on perspectives. Thanks to each of you all. God bless you in the work that each of you all are doing from your respective purchase. Thank you all so much. I'm going to transition to just offer some quick closing remarks here, and want to offer these brief thoughts. One, I want to remind people that in the story of Nehemiah, leading efforts to rebuild the walls, be mindful that Nehemiah was moved by the condition of the people in distress. We have millions of people in our country today who are in need of quality housing that they can afford. We have folks who also are in need of other types of amenities, healthcare, education, daycare, etc. And we have houses of worship in nearly every community across the land. You heard Sean Donovan talk about it earlier, red state, blue state, purple state, suburban, urban, rural, that have underutilized land that could potentially be developed to meet that need. So I encourage and invite us to be moved to practice some radical common sense and see if we can connect the resources to the need. In the story of Nehemiah, you will see an early example of a public-private effort. The faith community, government officials, business people, all working to rebuild that wall. And so we have to remember it takes a range of people and groups with a range of expertise and a range of resources to rebuild communities and help meet these needs. So ask yourself, we encourage you to ask yourself what you can do of your time, your talent, or your treasure to help be a force for good in this movement, regardless of what type of organization you are at. You heard some answers from our last two panels on that and throughout the day. Be mindful there will be naysayers, but remember what Nehemiah charged the people to do. Do not be afraid of them. Remember the Lord, great and awesome, and fight for your brethren, your sons, your daughters, your wives, and your houses. So I invite you today to remember your source of inspiration, strength, and provision, and who you are working to help, and get to it and stick with it. The needs are great, and so are the resources. So let us be intentional in bringing what we have to the collective effort to meet housing affordability and other community development needs with houses of worship and denominational entities as solution partners. And we can grow this movement and have real lasting change and impact in the lives of real people all across this country. Many thanks are due for today. Our sustaining partner, Wells Fargo, thank you. Our presenting partner, Capital One, thank you. For each and every one of our speakers and panelists, thank you. And to the entire Enterprise production team, the folks behind the scene that made today a reality, I thank each and every one of you for all your dedicated work on this. And finally, to each and every one of you who are watching this today and who will watch this in the future, when we will send out a recording, a link to the recording of this and some of the other resources from today. So thanks to each of you all for taking time to join us today, and all those who may watch in the future, and for the work you are doing now and the work that you will be willing to do. God bless you and be with you as you continue to do the good work.